That's the Australian soldier. He's oh dear. They're good at finding women or booze or gambling. They really are. No matter where you were in Vietnam, you could be in trouble. You could be, as I said, Vung Tau was soon to be out of bounds, so probably you're safe there. But anywhere else, you know, the VC were very good in Saigon, and little girls did it. Have a little girl on the back of a motorcycle. They just sided behind and bang, blow the back of somebody's head out. That happened regularly, mostly to Americans. But so it was always a war zone, no matter where you were, sort of thing.
How did you find the strength to cope with that as an officer in charge of these men?
You know, that's what I was trained for. You know, that's what they train us for. That's you know, that's part of the deal. Writing letters to next of kin is probably the hardest thing you'll ever have to do. You know, you try and make them nice, and you try and make them, you know, sound like they're real, sound like you're not bullshitting, sort of thing. It's not very much fun. Mm.
Are there things that have been said that you particularly find umbrage with?
Well, it was often said that D Company was ambushed, and you know, that's just crazy talk. It really is. Anybody who knows anything about the enemy knows that they were very good at ambushes. If we'd been ambushed, there'd have been none of us alive. We wouldn't have gone home. No matter what. And then when we get to our guys, we find 2 guys still alive. That's tremendous. You can't believe how good that was. And the other little guys are all lying. Yeah, sorry. All lying face down on their rifles. That's pretty good too. If you got to die, you got to die. At least they died like soldiers. I was born in 1941 in Brisbane. My dad was away at the war. He was in the Middle East and then in New Guinea. And so I was brought up by my mum and her sisters. And I was working at the time as a station hand, because the football club found a job for me. And I couldn't see a great deal of future in that. And I saw an ad in the paper that said something like, "Would you like to be an officer in Australia's Army?" I thought, probably better than what I'm doing now, so I rode away and got the application form. I had just the bare enough education. My parents at the time were living in Adelaide, so for Christmas 1963 I flew down to Adelaide. I asked the Army to be okay if I enlisted in Adelaide instead of Brisbane, which is why I've got a 4 oblique number instead of a 1 oblique number. People think I'm a South Australian. So I graduated to infantry and I was posted to the 2nd Battalion, which was then in Brisbane, which I was delighted about because I'm going back to Brisbane. In about September 1965, the first of the National Servicemen, that was the 2-year National Servicemen, arrived into 2 and 6 battalions. Primarily to 6 though, because 6 was going to go to Vietnam first. At that stage I was in C Company, Charlie Company of 6 Battalion. And just out of the blue I was one day transferred to 10 Platoon, D Company. Eventually we were warned to go to Vietnam and told we would be shipped out in June of '66. And we were sent to Vietnam in privately hired aircraft, Boeing 707s. We staged through Manila and arrived in Vietnam, and I remember very clearly walking down the gangway of the aircraft, and we had a lot of training prior to going about what Vietnam was going to be like. And we were told the bad guys would wear black pyjamas, you know. They didn't tell us that everybody else in Vietnam wears black pyjamas too. So I remember walking down the gangway of the aircraft and seeing all these people in black pyjamas and thinking, hey, shouldn't we be doing something? But, you know, you learn as you go along, sort of thing. They took us to a place called Vung Tau, which is a sort of a holiday place in Vietnam, and it was a very popular holiday resort when the French were in charge. And it was also a place where it was unofficially a no-fighting area. you'd walk down the street in Vung Tau and see a young Vietnamese man and say, "Mate, I'll bet you're on the other side when you're not here," you know. But nobody ever threw grenades there, or there were no terrorist type activities there. It was pretty well a safe haven place. And we lived in tents, and they put us through what they called acclimatization exercises, which was basically designed to be just a long walk in the hot sun, because it was very hot, with our full gear on, you know, just to get accustomed to the weather. But the one that we did, as we were going along, suddenly there was a burst of machine gun fire over our heads. And of course it was the first lot of live rounds we'd ever heard, and we took evasive action and went to cover and all those sort of things. And then the answer was through the radios came a story that there had just been Arvin, that was the Vietnamese army that were on our side. There was a range somewhere by, and they'd fired, and with the accidental rounds going overhead. I'm quite sure today that was crap. Somebody had decided, some of our people I'm sure, that'd be a good way to teach us what a live round sounds like, so they'd let a few burst rounds go over our heads. The same operation was quite memorable because we walked for about 2 days, just around in a fairly safe area, but it was very hot. And all of a sudden we started getting guys with heat prostration, you know, a couple of guys fainted. And so the boss called for helicopters to take them out. And as soon as the soldiers, there were blokes dropping everywhere, everybody said, "Oh, quick, I've got heat prostration, I'll go home on helicopter." So badly so that we had to sort of sort it out and say, "Look, there's no more helicopters." And I remember one of my lance corporals was lying there sort of moaning and carrying on, and I thought he was acting a bit. I said, "Well, look, that's the end of the helicopters, but what we can do, seeing as you're crook, I'll leave you here tonight with 2 guys to look after you, and you make your own way back tomorrow." And he jumped straight up and said, "No, I'm feeling better, Skip, I'm feeling better." So we went back to Vung Tau, and then eventually up to Nui Dat, which is where the battalion was based, and where the Australian Army basically was based for the whole of the Vietnam War. Nui Dat at that stage, 5 battalion had gone ahead of us, but they, of course, they owned one half of the circle, and we basically owned the other half of the circle. And we dug in from scratch, which meant we put out rolls of barbed wire, and we patrolled. There were nothing serious in the way of contacts for the first week or so. Although I can remember taking my first patrol out and being terrified, thinking, "Oh, this is real," you know. And we put up wire and we dug pits, and we, you know, sort of got in situations where had we been attacked, we would have been reasonably safe. Well, we hope we would have been reasonably safe. We were working very hard. The routine was for the 3 platoons in the company. Each company has 3 platoons. The 3 platoons would do day patrol, night ambush, and then back day patrol, night ambush. No days off. So you do day patrols, which usually were half platoon strength. And after a while, they decided that it was reasonable to let Platoon Commander take the patrol one day and the Platoon Sergeant take it the next day. So you did get a day off, sort of thing. But when you're on your day off, you were digging pits and preparing the camp, putting barbed wire out, all that sort of thing. There were some minor contacts. I do remember that on one of the night ambushes, with a sergeant of Charlie Company years ago that I'd known, I'd worked with actually before we both joined the army. They were doing a night ambush, and they were attacked at night by a group of Viet Cong in the ambush position. The Viet Cong had obviously were aware that the ambush was there, and they attacked them, and they killed one of our guys and wounded one, and our guys killed one of the VC. But then they had to be taken out at night. They were probably maybe a mile and a half away from the base camp in the jungle. And they were casevaced out, and the platoon sergeant, the guy in charge of the patrol, wasn't terribly sure of the procedures, and none of us would have been because none of us had ever done it. and you had to get a helicopter down in the jungle, which means you got to find a clearing or make a clearing. And that was probably our first experience of, hello, this is a fair dinkum business. We then did an operation just below Nuidat. There was a village called Hua Long, which had been totally evacuated by the Vietnamese government. They said, no one's allowed to live there. And we went through to clear it and sort of make it safe. And there are a lot of tunnels. There are tunnels everywhere in the village. And every day, somewhere or other, there'd be a few shots fired. But we almost never ever even saw the guy firing them. Some guy would pop out of a tunnel, let a few shots go, I think, just to keep our minds on that, I think. No real contacts there. There might have been there were a couple of brush contacts, I think. The first contact my platoon had, we were south of Hua Long, and the company was patrolling as a company. And then we stopped for some reason, I can't remember what. And when we stopped, we'd go into what we call harbour positions, where the platoon basically gets into all-round defence while it's stopped, so that if something comes along, we're in a position to fight. And we'd done that, and 3 guys just walked straight into us. They'd be walking along a sort of a track, which at that stage we hadn't discovered. And remember, the platoon at this stage has just barely stopped, and we're still putting people on the ground. And the first guy that saw them had to be the only guy in the platoon who was probably least qualified to see them. He was the stretcher bearer. Now, stretcher bearers, strictly speaking, shouldn't really even fight. They only carry weapons for their own defence. He's like the medic, the ambulance man. And he had an old Owen gun because of that reason he wasn't expected to use it. He had Owen guns which were pretty useless over anything more than about 15 or 20 metres. But he's seen these guys and he's hauled up and let a burst go. And they, of course, run away. One of them's dropped a rifle and we found big gouts of blood. So he'd obviously hit the first guy, but we never caught him. We followed up, but those days we were only allowed to go so far. That was probably the range of our own mortars or something like that. And so we were told to abandon the chase. That was the first time we actually saw any action in my platoon. That was about, I don't know, early in July. So we'd been there for about a month. Interestingly, in that same operation, we found a big tunnel, and the entrance to the tunnel was a weapon pit. And we didn't send anyone down the tunnel. Later on, we would send sappers, engineers down the tunnels. But at that stage, we just sort of didn't know what to do with it, so we reported it. The company commander said it's the CO, the man in charge of the battalion. Do you understand these terms?
Yeah.
Soldiers talking initials.
No, it's great.
Yeah.
We'll go back and ask you lots of details about this, but it's really good that you're on the roll.
The CO wanted to see the tunnel, and so the company commander, that Major Smith, my boss, said, send a small patrol back to me, which is only, might have been 400 or 500 metres through the bush, to guide the CO and his party out to where the tunnel is. So I sent a Lance Corporal and 2 guys, and as they walked through the bush, a figure in black pyjamas leaped up and ran, and the forward scout fired and killed her. It was a woman. And remember that she was in an area, that was in a totally forbidden area, but there were lots of people. Sadly, the kid was very badly upset. In fact, he was no use anymore. We really had to send him home. Interesting, when the CO's party came out, there were probably 10 or a dozen people when you count the CO, and he's got about 3 signallers, and the chief of the artillery, he's got about 3 signallers, and then there's bodyguards and all sorts of people. But about 15 of them standing around this pit, and all of a sudden one of the guys on my perimeter, because my guys were out 20 or 30 metres out in a circle, saw some movement of some sort. It could have been anything, might have been a water buffalo, who knows. But he's gone, which is, bad guys. And I've turned around to say, hang on, sir, I'll go and see what's going on. And these whole 15 guys have jumped into this pit. And there were feet and radio sets and things kicking. It was so hilarious. And the sergeant and I, we both burst out laughing. Which didn't go down too well with the CO, but it was funny. So where are we? We're getting up towards Longtown, I guess. Longtown was the next village east of us, so east of Hualong. So it was sort of southeast of where the Nui Dat was. And over the sort of July, early August period, we did patrols, a lot of which went to the edges of Longtown. Usually going to half platoon patrols, and a half platoon patrol was really one section, which is 10 guys with one machine gun and one gun group, and you'd take another gun group for another section, so that'd be 3 guys with a machine gun. So you'd have 2 machine guns, and then you'd have the platoon commander and his signaller and his stretcher bearer. Pull-off stretcher bearers got every patrol because we only had one. And that basically was about 15 guys. So that was the size of the patrols. We did a lot of those. I took one around the middle of July down into the area between Longtown and Hualong, and we came across 3 guys. We were going along an hour ahead with the gun group on the left and the rifle group on my right, and the forward scouts saw one VC who was obviously a sentry for the group, 3 of them, and they exchanged fire, and I hooked the gun group in from the left, and we killed the sentry guy. The other 2 had bugged out, and we weren't allowed to go any further to chase them. We followed up and radioed back, and this was the first guy we'd seen, the first casualty, enemy casualty we'd seen. It was a bit of a shock to everybody, but we took his weapon and his gear and buried him, and took that back to camp when we went back. My company commander, who, as I say, was a bit of a tough bastard, I was expecting to get a pat on the back. You've got one of the bad guys. He said, "Where's the other 2?" That was the sort of guy he was. But those 2 fellas that withdrew straight down the track towards Longtown. But after that, in a day or 2 after that, I took another half platoon patrol, which went right through the rubber plantation, which was to the north of Longtown, where we eventually fought the battle. And there was nothing in the rubber plantation, it was empty. And the other guys in the company, the other platoon commanders, had done patrols through the same area. So at that stage, we had no idea there was any real large force. We'd only ever come across these groups of 3. So that's the middle of July. About the last week in July, we were doing a company operation. And at one stage, we were going along with 12 platoon and company headquarters to the north, and my platoon and 11 platoon to the south in 2 groups. And 12 platoon hit some guys, probably again one of these groups of 3, because the classic VC was a group of 3. And they had a bit of a firefight, and the VC ran away, and Harry came up on the radio and said, "They're coming towards you." Well, we had just reached the edge of a big clearing, and I just told 11 platoon to stop where they were, and I put my guys down along the edge of the clearing, and this guy came running straight towards us. When he got about halfway across, my platoon sergeant fired at him with a grenade launcher, which he shouldn't have done. Everything was wrong about it. That's tactics. But anyway, we killed the guy over. I fired in the section in front of him. He fired, and we killed him. But there were probably 2 more guys behind him, which we should have got, and we didn't get. So the platoon sergeant and I had a bit of a disagreement. And I went to Harry and said, "I won't work with this guy, so you better move him or move me." So he was moved to 11 platoon, and I got the 11 platoon sergeant. We were both delighted about it, to be quite frank. So where were we then? Then we're getting towards August. There was another operation. I just can't remember that many details. We didn't have too much contact with it. The thing that we were learning at this stage, you can only go by the experiences you've had. Every time we had a contact, there was almost always just 3 guys, and they were bugged out. They just ran for their lives. They'd fire a couple of shots. Often, there's the contacts that I was involved in, we might get one of the guys, but the others would run and get away. And so we got to the stage pretty well where if you got a contact, you just chased after them, And it all sounds a bit bloodthirsty, I know, talking about it like this, but, you know, as young soldiers, we're sort of keen to do well, you know, and I think that's pretty important when you think about what happened to 11 Platoon at Longtown.
Yeah, don't worry about any of that. We've heard really graphic stories and nothing offends us. Yeah, so be free to tell the experiences you experienced it.
Yeah, well, probably if we're getting up towards Longtown now, we won't be very long before it happened. We'd had a lot of reports of any large enemy formations moving around the place, but we just never saw any. And so, you know, I spent nearly 2/3 of the time I was in the army in intelligence, but that was after Vietnam. And I know how frustrating it is. You get reports and you tell people and it doesn't come true, and they think, oh, these guys are a bunch of donkeys, they don't know what they're talking about. And to be quite frank, if somebody had told me there were 2,000 people out in the Longtown rubber plantation, I would have said rubbish. So that was the attitude that we had around that time. The actual time of the battle, or about the 16th, 2 days before, my platoon was sent to do what we used to call shotgun duty on the APCs. The APCs would, as one of their sort of daily duties, would take convoys up and down to Vung Tau, you know, supply convoys and things like that. And the APC just consists of, you know, a square tank type thing with one commander and one driver. And that's not really enough to fight the damn thing if they do get into trouble. It's meant to carry a section of troops. And so one of the platoons from one of the battalions was always rostered to be with the APC squadron to ride shotgun for them, to put troops on to go down and up and down the road if there was a problem. And at night time to provide perimeter defence for them, because the way their squadron is designed, they haven't got enough troops, sort of thing, to man pickets and do all that sort of thing. So yeah, I think we used to get about 4 days in a row. Every now and again you'd get a 4-day job with the APC squadron. So I was doing that on the time up to the battle. So on the 17th of August, my platoon was not with my company, was up in the APC squadron. And in the middle of the night, the base was fired on by what we thought at the time were mortars. None landed anywhere near where I was. We could hear them going off, and we got the reports on the radios what was going on. But and again, we sort of thought, oh well, this is just some bit of opportunity stuff, you know. They brought in a mortar team, got close enough, and they fired 20 or 30 rounds, and then gone for their lives. But there were some people injured by the shelling. And the next day, the 18th, I came back to the company. I was ordered to go back to the company, and the company was ordered to mount a 3-day operation, company-size operation. What had happened so it must have been the 16th that we were ordered. The 17th, I think the B company platoon ran out. Yes, one of the other companies went out to try and find these guys, and they found a position from where mortars and rocket launchers had fired, and empty shells and things like that. But there was only a platoon and the company headquarters, and they'd been out for a day and they only had a day's rations and that sort of thing, so they had to be relieved. And so D Company was mounted to do a 3-day operation to sweep the area and see if he could catch these guys that had fired at us. You probably heard this before, but that of course was the day of the first concert first concert we were going to have. And we were most cheesed off to be told we were going out in the bush. So we mounted up, 3 days rations, which is that's about as much as a man can carry, you know. And that's about as long as you can carry it on your back. And weapon, you know, when you consider ammunition, lots of things. And we set off about 10 o'clock in the morning to patrol out to where B Company was. And, you know, I remember quite clearly we were walking out and you could hear the guys tuning the guitars and that, you know, because for the concert, which was going to start about midday. And we were a bunch of pissed off soldiers, totally, you know. And we got out to where B Company was, and found them and saw the position. And we had a quick lunch there, you know, with them. It was just probably 10 metres, like. And then they went back to camp, and we set off to follow the tracks. There were two tracks. We started off one platoon up, which is pretty really a standard way of moving. And my platoon was forward platoon. And we went up through the rubber, not very far, probably only a couple hundred yards, and the track split quite obviously. You know, we're following a track that had been made by men walking a couple of days ago, just obviously. Not just not an old beaten track sort of thing. And it split into two, and I got on the radio and said to Harry, you know, split in two. He said, okay, well you take the left fork and we'll send 11 up the right fork. So he then went to 2 platoons up, which is not common because it's quite a big formation, but we're in a rubber plantation, which is a lot more open than jungle, you know, it's lines of trees. And there's a little bit of undergrowth, but not much, you know. So Sharpie and 11 platoon have gone pretty well straight ahead up to the centre of the rubber, and I've gone around the edge of it like that. And next thing was we came to a track, like a road really, with 2 actual fences along each side of it, which went right through the rubber. It was even marked on the map, in fact. And just when you're patrolling, you know you never cross a thing like that without doing what they call an obstacle crossing drill. So you know, you put some people on the ground facing both ways, and then you send somebody across and they face both ways in the track and the way you're going, and you go across in jumps, so that if something happens, or if they've got a machine gun positioned up the track that you don't know about, you've got something on the ground to fight back if you get shot. So we did that to get across, you know, and nothing happened. And then as we just shaken out again, and I was travelling in Arrowhead 1 up, which is, the first section is in a V, like that, and myself and the platoon headquarters here, and then the 2 other sections are coming along in single file, like that, so it's like a big arrow. And we, as I say, we just shook out and started to move again when firing broke out up to our right. And there's a slight hill up to where they were. Not a hill, but a slight rise. And I guess they would have been 200 yards away, you know, something like that, through the rubber. And Sharpie came up on the radio and said they'd hit a bunch of guys. Apparently these fellas had just sort of walked into them, and they killed one or something, and the others bugged off, and of course they just went after them, you know, through the rubber, running. And of course they ran straight to the front of a regiment, which is, you probably heard about from them, which is a pretty bad thing to happen to them. At that stage, I said to we used to patrol, what you call patrol order is, everything you fight with is on your belt, and your water is on your belt, or you have enough water to survive on. And the rest of the stuff, your rations and your sleeping bag and your mosquito net and that sort of thing. And sadly also our entrenching tools, which is the thing we dig trenches with, are put on your big pack. So that if you get into contact, you can just drop that pack where it stays and you haven't got near as much to carry. But you've got all the things you need to survive with on you. So I just said to my guys, drop your packs, and shook on, brought them up into two up formation, and brought another section up on the right, because I thought, well, for sure we'll be going in from the left. And then the firing was just getting louder and louder, more and more fire up to the right. And Sharpie came up on the radio and said something like, "It's too big for me. I think it's at least a platoon." You know, your general tactics is that you don't try to attack anything unless you've got it outnumbered about 3 to 1. You know, and that's a sensible way to do things. If it's a platoon, then it should be a company that attacks it, something 3 times the size, sort of thing. If it's a section, well, a platoon can attack it. So I thought immediately, well, okay, this is fine. I'm on the left flank. I'm going to be the assault platoon. Sharpie will stay where he is and provide fire support, and 12 platoon will be the reserve platoon. So I shook him out into assault formation, and then Sharpie comes and said, no, it's very, very hard to get, for me to do much on the radio at all, because that was where the action was, and he was talking all the time to the company commander, and he was calling for artillery fire. He came up and said something like, they're going to attack me, which is, we all said, shit, this is not in the rules, you know. We're supposed to be a lot more than them. Our guy then got through to the radio and said to Harry I could go forward on the left, and he said, yeah, go, just like that. And so we went forward, and that's when the rain started, and we just stepped off, and down she came. It did every afternoon, you know, every 3 o'clock every afternoon in Vietnam, it just buckets down. And that's in the monsoon season anyway. So we advanced forward, and this stage I'm 2 platoons up, and myself and the signaller, and the stretcher bearer in the centre of the two, but they're probably from here to the wall or in front of us, you know. And we walked through, and nothing, still we were just going towards the sound of the firing. And then we saw a little bit of a lump like that, and as we went over, there's this bunch of guys going like that in front of us. They're in line, so we're coming like that, and they're about like that. And at first I thought they might be 11 platoon, I really did, I thought, you know, because they were all wearing green uniforms, which I should have twigged straight away. But I didn't. So I just kept the guys going, and yeah, when we got another 10 yards on, you could see they were carrying AK-47s, and they had little, you know. So I just said fire, and I just went down on my knee and started to fire, and the guys didn't. We just all dropped down and fired, and we just wiped them right out. The guys further to the left turned left and just trotted away to my, you know, that's the way I would describe it anyway. Now they may have been a bugle, I don't know, I'm not, there were bugles blew all bloody afternoon. That probably was a bugle call that said, you know, cut out. But of course as soon as they cleared, we got up again and kept going towards 11 platoon. We only went maybe 30 or 40 metres, and wow, we got hit from our front and from the left. And the first guy hit in the platoon, and I think it had to be a sniper, I reckon, was my signaller. It was hit through the chest, luckily high, and right through the radio, and that had to be deliberate, I reckon. Could have been worse, so they could have gone for Platoon Commander. And there were two or three guys hit in the left-hand section, but nobody badly. So I put them on the ground again, and we tried to get the radio going, which we couldn't do. A young Hornung, who subsequently died, poor bugger, he didn't die from that, he came back to Australia and died a couple of years later. So where are we? We've just been...
Just fixing the radio.
Yeah, we're trying to fix the radio, yeah. Well, we couldn't fix it, the bullet went right through it too. So at that stage I had, I think, 4 wounded and none serious. Hornung was probably the most serious. The bullet went right through him, but he seemed to miss all the important bits. One of the guys wounded was Johnny Cash, who was Lance Corporal, in the left-hand section. He was a 2IC, the left-hand section. So I said to him, look, take these guys, just crawl out the back till you get out of the firefight. Just go straight back there, you'll find the company, it's only a couple hundred yards back. Tell Harry that the radio's out. I've had a couple of casualties, but I'm going to try and go forward by fire and movement. And that's what they did. And then we went forward by fire and movement. Fire and movement is just basically these guys fire while those guys move. And then those guys go to ground and they fire and these guys move, you know. But the whole principle of that is that the guys who are firing are supposed to be keeping the enemy's heads down. Well, we couldn't see the bloody enemy. It was pouring rain. And they're sort of 100 yards or so away from us, but you couldn't sort of see guys to fire at. And a lot of them were dug in. And I think they're guys in trees too, I'm not sure about that. I really think they might have been up the rubber trees, some of them anyway. So we did that. We did about two leaps forward. I had another couple of guys wounded. And it was obvious to me that we weren't suppressing their fire. So if I just keep doing that, I'm going to end up with nobody, which is not much point in that. So we'll stop there, hold it there. And we stopped on the deck and got the other wounded guys back and organised. And then we got mortared or hit with artillery fire. That's again, we don't know, I thought it was mortar fire, but certainly about 12 rounds of some large shell thing went off on us and around us. And one of them was between me and where Neil Rankin, my platoon sergeant, and he would have had the stretcher bearer probably, or the orderly who had the stretcher bearer probably. I saw the round go off and I thought it landed right on top of him. And in fact, the Rankin himself, he lives here on Bribey too, was lifted off the ground with the force of it, right off the ground. But not a scratch. And nobody else hurt. We were very lucky, maybe because the ground was wet. And as I say, it could have been enemy mortars or it could have been our own artillery, I don't know. And about that stage, through the rubber from behind me comes a fellow called Bill Kell, who was a reserve signaller in the company headquarters. And Harry had sent him forward with a spare radio. So I got on the radio and said, look, we've taken a few casualties. I'm not getting anywhere with fire and movement, but I can hold you or do what do you want me to do? He said, no, bring your guys back to me, and we'll form a company position here. So we did the fire and mover thing again and said, we're going this way this time. And we only had to go really 30 or 40 metres because the rain was so heavy. Same thing for them, they couldn't see what they're firing at either, So we got out of the firefight area and went back to company headquarters. When I got back there, Harry said, right, I put your platoon down facing the southeast, which is basically where 11 Platoon had gone, up towards where 11 Platoon had gone. So he put me down and put him down all round defence with company headquarters and one of the sections of 12 Platoon sort of filling in the back segment. And he sent put the other two sections of 12 on straight up the same track 11 Platoon had taken. And basically the same thing happened to them. They went forward as far as they could go and got stopped by fire and things like that. This is getting a fair way into the battle. I think this stage, I suppose, an hour's gone by. Still raining pretty heavily. We saw, from where we were seeing people moving all the time. A large group moved across from the front and in fact got into where our packs were. We fired on them, but they were sort of too far away to be sure of getting them, and ammunition was already starting to become a problem. Another group moved down to the south of us. And they're up in 12 Platoon, they threw smoke, which allowed 11 guys, what was left of 11 Platoon, to see that they were friendlies, and they just got up and bolted and came back to them and eventually back through the company. My ex-platoon sergeant, who was that stage running 11 Platoon, came back in. I said, where's Mr. Sharp? And he said, oh, he's been dead for about an hour. Shit. Because, Sharpie was a very, very close friend, and you just sort of think you're immortal. You can't imagine you're going to get killed, or somebody you know really, really closely is going to get killed. But of course, poor 11 at that stage had lost 11 or 12 blokes. They went through us and formed a base of a perimeter, and we had a little bit of a lull in the fighting then. American Air Force went overhead, so far up that they couldn't see us, dropped their bombs about 5 miles in front of us, totally useless. And we sort of consolidated, and in that period is when the helicopters came in and dropped the ammunition to us. They basically just hovered above us and kicked the boxes out. And my platoon sergeant went off and with the CSM and the other platoon sergeants broke them up and threw them around to the guys, so we got some ammunition. Oh, at that stage I forgot to say, the first time I changed the magazine on my Armalite in the initial contact, I fired 20 rounds, I changed the magazine. The first round I fired exploded in the thing, what they call a separated case. When the bolt goes forward to pull the empty round out, because the round is stuck in there, it pulls the back off the round and not tears the end of it. So the case is still in, and the only way you can get it out is if you've got which I didn't have. But I did have Brian Hornung's rifle, that was my C80's SLR, but it only had one magazine, because his magazines are in his pouches. So I was using that for most of the battle. So I was quite delighted when they threw a few SLR rounds around. Not that my job isn't really to shoot people, my job is to make sure that the other guys are shooting people. But it gets to the stage, and got to the stage in the battle where you're shooting people of necessity. So we got the ammunition, which was good. The fact that we had the bit of a lull and were able to get the ammunition was probably a big thing in keeping us going. And then we saw them form up, and they formed up basically the way that the other guys had come up where 11 Platoon had been. And when rain is easing, still raining but easing, you can see further. And they, if we'd have been doing it, we'd have done exactly the same thing really. They formed up in line abreast, 8 to 10 metres between men, walked at a fast walking pace with a reserve force about 50 or 60 metres behind them. And that was when our artillery really came in. It was really good, because it's the first group, the assault group, that would come in and then get in. They'd usually get in under the artillery, but the artillery would come in and the reserve group used to be just like a pack of cards, wiped out. We wouldn't fire in. There wasn't any singing out of fire or stone fire, because first of all, the noise is so loud you wouldn't hear anyway. But secondly, everybody knows to wait until they're close enough, sort of thing. So my guys would fire when they were about 30 or 40 metres out, and we'd hold them, knock them over. The other guys, the guys he didn't kill sadly, would go to ground with the other fellas, and then they'd be sniping at us in between the assaults, and that's where I lost all of my guys, really. A fellow called Rick Aldersey, who was a machine gunner on the left-hand section.
Yes.
So where I was, Rick Aldersey was machine gunner, but because of where he, this what we've pieced together sort of thing, I don't think he didn't live to tell us, but he moved his gun position, and I would think it's probably because he had a line of rubber trees, which is a fort, getting in his way or something. So he's moved to get a better position. And of course one of these guys had seen him and shot him. And Maxie Wiles was the number two on the gun. And we have a rifleman whose job is to help the gunner and take over, of course, if he's killed. He went to get the gun and he got killed, probably by the same guy. But of course that happened at that stage. I didn't actually see it happen. I'd known from the section commander that it happened. And Jack Jurier was a Lance Corporal too, I see, at the right-hand section. I don't know what happened, but I guess he got sniped too. But to give you an example, Cal, the fellow who brought the radio forward, he stayed with me then as my signaller for the rest of the battle. And he's on the other side of the rubber tree from me. And at one stage, he just went like that and went bang and shot a VC. He was about where that port is. He had crawled in between the two forward sections. So that's why they were sort of trying, the guys who were still surviving. So pretty brave guys they were. And there were two assaults, like two major assaults like that. There was there's firefighting and that going on in between, but two major assaults where they actually formed up company attack. Second one pretty much the same as the first. We stopped the assault rank and the artillery stopped the reserve rank. But this stage it's just about dark and we're getting very low on ammunition. I had 12 rounds left, I think. Then again, I wasn't doing as much shooting probably as the guys up the front. The problem then was with the darkness. If they assaulted after dark, they're going to get in amongst us. We're going to have to stand up and fight them, and we didn't even have bayonets, which was bad. We should have had bayonets. That's another story I forgot to tell you at the start. At one stage, early in the piece, when we were doing these fleeting patrol contacts, myself and the other two platoon commanders sitting around talking, said, why the bloody hell do we carry bayonets? Every time you go to ground, they dig in your shit, And they're out of date, they're useless. They haven't used them since the First World War sort of thing. Why do we carry them? So we got all head up about it and went to Harry and said, no, we think bayonets are bloody useless. We shouldn't be carrying them. He said, well, leave it up to you. It's your platoon. You tell them if they don't want to carry bayonets, they don't have to. Your responsibility. So most of us didn't. Also, a lot of us, like for me, my normal weapon was an Armalite, which was a second-hand American Armalite we got from the Yanks. So I didn't even have a bayonet for it. We didn't carry bayonets is the bad thing. And believe me, there's nothing more that grabs your attention more than when the enemy have got bayonets. You think, oh shit. And we, you know, if we stand up and get involved in the bayonet fight, they're going to be have a bit of an advantage. And that's about the time. That's about the first time I thought, oh well, this is bloody. Looks like it might be the end of the little fat fella. And just around that, almost the same time, just exactly as it's getting dark. In fact, if you saw it in the movie, you wouldn't believe it. There's a roaring right up to the right where we were. And this is to my memory right now, and other people saw it differently. The way I saw it, 3 APCs come roaring up on the right-hand side. They raced forward. They were all firing their machine guns. And they went about 100 yards in front of level where we were and stopped and continued firing. And one of the guys got killed. But all across our front, the VC just got up and started to withdraw. We're still shooting them, but they all just started to withdraw. And I reckon their commander just said, oh, this must be reinforcements. Looks like we lost this one, let's get out of here. So they did. And that was pretty well the end of the battle as far as the serious part. Shortly afterwards, the APCs came through the back with troops on board, which was A Company, and been sent out to relieve us. And you know, we started to find the dead guys and sort out who was wounded and who wasn't, and all that sort of thing. And we were all in shock, sort of thing, you know. People just looking at each other and nobody's even talking, really. Then they decided that we'd pick up the wounded guys, put them on the APCs, take them back out of the rubber plantation to a place where the helicopters could come and get them. So we did that. The helicopters came after some problems. And sadly, our guys, I was a lot more critical then than I am now. But our pilots just weren't trained. They'd only been there as long as we had. They'd never done this. They'd never gone in at night to get out wounded guys. And they wouldn't land. They kept saying, you know, we don't know where you are, show us a light. Oh, turn the light out, they'll see us, and all, you know, all that sort of thing. And then they had one American dust-off. Where they got him from, I don't know. But he just sort of came in, put his landing lights on, went plonk. We put as many helmets on him as we could. And I think the other guy said, oh, that's what we've got to do, and they did it. So they took the wounded out on the choppers. Then we just sat there all night. We didn't have any food because our packs were still up in the burnies. I think we managed to brew up a few hot drinks. All in a bit of shock. And then the next morning, the boss came in and said, right, we're going to assault back in again. I remember thinking, bloody hell. I would have thought they'd use A Company, you know. But now I realise why they did it. I don't know if you know this, but if you look at the figures, the survivors from Long Tan, there are 108 of us, of whom 90 odd survived, and 92 survived. Then cases of bad PTSD and stuff like that, we've all got a bit of it. But the really bad cases, we're way below the national average, because we went back in, and as we went back in, we saw what we'd done. You know, even as it was in front of 11 Platoon, where 11 Platoon were first stopped, they'd cleaned out nearly all the VC bodies from there. Where I went forward the first time, no bodies, they're all gone. VC were very good at taking their bodies away. But they still managed to leave 250, you know, and that was not true. We spent all day burying them and counting them and all that. And there was a big urgency from Australia to know the figures, because they'd already been told there's 18 of our guys dead, and that's a major tragedy. So they wanted to know, you know, if they'd taken all the VC bodies away, oh, we'd all be crazy. The brigadier said, and I heard him say it, he said, right, whatever the count is at 1,500 is what we'll send to Australia. And it was 245, and so they said that, and they found another 30 or 40 before nightfall. And we found them, tracks of them and graves for weeks afterwards. Now, D Company didn't kill all those guys. Probably more than half would have been killed by the artillery, but we gave them a major headache. Yeah, so, you know, we buried them all and sat around for that day and most of the next one, I think. And then they pulled the officers out, pulled us out for a bloody press conference or something. And the soldiers then pulled them out and sent them down to Vung Tau for a swim on a day or two off. And remember that was, we got there in June, that was August. We still had 10 months to go. So that's a long term anyway.
When you look back at that now, what you said that you have suffered a little bit of PTSD from that. What are the strongest images that remain with you?
If I have bad dreams, if they're military bad dreams, there's always a lack of something. Something doesn't work, or we haven't got ammunition. That's one thing that really gets me. I'm a lot better now, maybe, than I was 4 or 5 years ago. I still occasionally awake and I'm sure there's some bugger in the house, you know, and I lie there really quiet, trying to hear where he is so I can, you know, that sort of thing. Get a few bad dreams, but they're not as bad as they were, I guess. I also, see, I served another 20 years in the army after that. So, a different background to a lot of the guys. The worst cases, I think, are the guys who were wounded on the day and went straight home. You know, if you talk to them, a fellow who lives here on the island that I know, Dennis Spencer, badly shot up, spent 12 months in hospital when he got home. You know, we woke up on a bloody Hercules with dead bodies in body bags on the same plane. Goes home, doesn't know what happened, never saw their battlefield. Really only can read it in the paper what happens, probably couldn't read the paper for a month or so. You know, all he can think of is the bad parts, you know. And it's pretty awful to say it was good seeing all the dead enemy, but it bloody was, you know. I can't deny that, you know. If I thought we'd lost those guys for nothing, you know, you'd be a lot worse, I think.
Can you describe a little bit more the clean-up of the bodies, how that was organised and how you went about that?
Well, it wasn't done very well because it was a physically huge job. Though we had A company was helping and a company of 5RR were helping. They just gave us areas and told us to count them, then dig pits as deep as we could and put them in, you know. Which we did. Later, I believe the engineers went out with a dozer and dug a really big pit. We've subsequently received reports supposedly from the Vietnamese that they were very impressed with the fact that we did bury them. I think that we thought we'd just leave them there. That's hardly the situation, you know. But it was a lousy job, it really was. You know, because by day 2 in the tropics, it's awful. You know. Yeah, I know a huge amount of weapons. We counted all the weapons up. There were 2 prisoners. It's quite interesting stuff. One little prisoner was a little North Vietnamese guy. He was only a kid too. And he was just absolutely terrified. I guess to him we look like bloody spacemen, you know. We're bigger and we're bloody got different gear and all that. And he would have told you anything they wanted to know. They were talking to him and that's interesting because they did say to him, what were your orders, what were you doing? And he said, we were going to attack the foreign soldiers on the hill. So there's been a lot of arguments about what they were doing. They were going to attack the base camp that night. I'm sure that's the truth. The other little guy was a local VC from D445, the local battalion. And he was shot in the groin. Had a hole in his groin with a very rough treatment to it, you know. And he was just totally, he said, I don't give a stuff, you know, I'm not going to tell you nothing and you can do what you bloody like. He said it all in Vietnamese and it was translated, but that was the attitude. Very tough little guy. They were sort of, you know, all you had was our intelligence officer who's a captain, infantryman, not really trained, and he's just trying to find out basically who they were and where they come from, where they might have gone. And you know, we found out, of course, they were North Vietnamese Regiment, 275. And another interesting thing, as we were driving down to Vung Tau, a couple of days later in Berea, which is the main town in the area, there's a great big banner warmly congratulating, I've got a photo of it somewhere, congratulating the Australian forces on their heroic victory over the 275 North Vietnamese Regiment. And I often wonder if they had another one which said, warmly welcoming the 275. Just waiting to see who won. I wouldn't be surprised if they did.
So can you tell us about leaving Australia and the journey over there?
Yeah, we got on a plane that I hired 707s. Each company on one plane sort of thing. Whether we all went the same day, I can't remember. I think we did. But we sort of travelled separately. We landed at Manila. The Philippines at that stage weren't involved in the war. They were later, and they were neither supporting nor non-supporting it, and so they had armed Filipino military police at the airport, and we weren't allowed out of the transit lounge thing. There's enough second funny story to that, but I don't know if I should tell you. Right. 10 days later, after we arrived in Vietnam, we were still on the beach at Vung Tau when soldiers from the company started reporting with gonorrhea. The only place they could have got it was in Manila, and we weren't allowed to have the transit lounge. So you tell me, you work that one out for me. That's the Australian soldier. He's, oh dear. They're good at finding women or booze or gambling. They really are.
Can you tell us about arriving in Saigon?
Yeah, I just vaguely. The main thing I remember is just sort of walking down and seeing all the black pyjamas, thinking the buggers are everywhere already, and then realising they were women who were cleaning the footpaths and things. And just trying to think how we got to. Yeah, we were loaded onto C-130 Hercules and flown down to Vung Tau, which was only a short hour's flight maybe.
So what was your very first impression of Vietnam when you arrived there?
Oh, it was hot, pretty smelly sort of place, most places. The beach was good, Vung Tau wasn't bad at all. It was not surf, it was a bit like Redcliffe, like Bribey Island, actually, like the surf here. Not really surf, but a bit of waves. That was pretty well it. We didn't see much else at that stage. We were Vung Tau at that stage. We were just in a big army camp, all tents, and we weren't allowed to leave or anything like that. So we just stayed there and sort of did PT and that. We had a strip show, first strip show I'd ever seen in my whole life. 24 years old or something. That was on the beach. Poured rain. All the girls' mascara ran. It was very tough for them.
What were your expectations before you arrived, or when you first arrived, in regards to what sort of a war it would be, how you would be fighting this war?
Well, I don't really think I had much preconceived ideas. I thought, I knew what to do if in a particular situation arose. I thought I did anyway. I thought we would be good. I expected that we would perform well. When you consider the amount of training an Australian soldier had before going to Vietnam, compared with an American, we were so highly overtrained. Really, American soldier could honestly be walking the ground in Vietnam carrying a rifle 6 weeks after he joined the army. That's just not enough. You can't do that to a guy. By the time he goes through a recruit training, and before our fellows would go through recruit training and then do a year training before we went to Vietnam at least. So we're a lot better trained than them. Then again, there were a lot fewer than them too, so we had to be well trained.
So what contact did you have with any American soldiers in those early days?
Not much. We had an American artillery battalion? No, I don't mean a company. Attached to us, they had very big artillery pieces. and they fired in support of us if required, sort of thing. Paul and I went across a couple of times. We got invited across to a barbecue once with them. We went across and played bridge with a couple of Americans once. They were good guys. CO was a Negro guy first. He was the CO, Lieutenant Colonel, which in those days was a bit surprising. There were a lot of black guys in the American Army, but not many officers. He was a nice guy. Didn't really have much contact with them apart from that, you know. Where else? Flew in helicopters with them, but again, usually we're just getting on and getting out.
But you spoke earlier about how some of the American soldiers at least had received very little training. Did you sort of observe the effects of that at all in Vietnam?
Yeah, one particular occasion we looked after a bridge. It was out to the west. It's part of an operation. I don't know exactly why it was, but we ended up one night, D Company, looking after that half of the area where there was a bridge was the main thing in the middle that we didn't want the Kong to blow up for some reason. And an American company had the other half. And I was the right-hand edge platoon of D Company. So I've got three gun positions as basically what we set up at night. The Americans had a roll of wire, just one single roll of that big high wire, you know, down at wire. They'd rolled out right around the front of their position. And I'd check on my right-hand gun in the middle of the night. I'd go around a couple of times a night, check that they were all awake and that sort of thing. And my two guys in the gun pit are absolutely packing them. They're terrified. I said, look at this guy. The wire starts there that the Americans have laid out, and about 15 yards away there's an American soldier, steel helmet, smoking a bloody cigarette, rifle on his shoulder, walking up and down outside the wire. He's their sentry. And my guys are down in a weapon pit. They've dug a weapon. They're down. They're behind a machine gun. Two of them. You know, they said, this guy's going to draw all the crabs in the world. You know, if there's any bad guys around the place, they're going to pick him up pretty quick. And we're close. You know, can't we get rid of him? Can't do much. That's the way they did things. An interesting thing at night time, if we're in the bush, we stand to, and in dawn and dusk, down we stand to. British Army's always done it. So you're awake, lying behind your weapon as dawn breaks and as night falls, because that's the most common time to be attacked. The Americans had a thing they called reconnaissance by fire. So American companies out in the bush, they'd get into a circle like that, put out wire if they had it, wherever they get the wire from, I don't know. Then each man would point his rifle outwards and fire a full magazine. Huge noise, huge racket, and the theory being, if there's any bad guys sitting out, they would chase them away. I heard done the same operations the first time I ever heard that. The huge amount of firing starts about a mile away from us. And of course we all stand to and waiting for what's going on. Somebody's been attacked. Oh no, just reconnaissance by fire.
What did you think of that?
Oh, well, we thought it was pretty funny, really. But again, the Americans were very critical of us. They reckon we were, what was the word? Overcautious. Because we wouldn't walk on tracks. We wouldn't walk on tracks. So when you walk on tracks, you get blown up by mines. It's pretty simple stuff. We don't walk on tracks. We weren't trained not to walk on tracks in Australia. But that takes a bit longer. It's quicker if you haven't got to beat through the bush, but you also get killed on it.
And they walked on tracks?
Yeah, oh yeah. They had very little idea of sort of bush tactics at all. They walked close together, walked as close together as you and me, you know. One behind the other, all down the track, and they wonder why they got ambushed, sort of. They weren't, you know, I'm not being critical. They're a different army to us, with a whole different mentality. A hell of a lot more people, you know, so their tactics are based on having a lot of people and being prepared to sacrifice a lot of people. We just can't afford to.
So when you left Vung Tau, you went to, did you go to Nui
Up to
Dat?
Nui Dat. Mm.
So can you tell us about your first impressions of Nui Dat and what you saw there?
Yeah, well, it was a rubber plantation. It was a hill, not a very big hill by anybody's standards really, but a hill which was surrounded on sort of three sides pretty well with a rubber plantation. An old rubber plantation, big trees. which if you've got to live somewhere in the bush, well, not such a bad place to live. It's a little bit cleared. We just started off by digging in weapon pits, living in them for the first couple of days, and then we got some wire out and more wire out, and then we sort of gradually developed the place over, the first 2 or 3 months, until we got to the stage where we had full permanent tents, sandbagged, so that if we were mortared, and if you're asleep and a mortar bomb fell you, unless it fell right on top of you, probably wouldn't get hurt. And then further back again from that, we would have a communal mess tent for the soldiers, and the officers and sergeants shared another one, a smaller one. Showers, just bush showers.
Can you tell me about the day patrols? Exactly what would happen in day patrol?
Yeah, primarily we did half platoon patrols. That lasted pretty well all the way through, unless it was going to be just for the day. You'd get you'd know you're going. It was your turn, sort of thing. You'd probably get a briefing the day before.
What would be involved in the briefing?
Oh, they just say, look, you're going out. We want you to go out there, around here, and come back there, sort of thing. And see what you see. The idea of patrols like that is the enemy know that at any time somebody can come across them, sort of thing. It's just to keep them away from the base camp, basically, or to find out if they're coming close to you. They're more to find information than to specifically go out and try and kill people. So you'd get the thing. I'd have a look at it on the map. For a normal day patrol, you wouldn't get a reconnaissance. I did a couple of platoon patrols of a couple of days, overnight ones, where I was given opportunity to go up in a helicopter and have a look at the area, a little helicopter, a little Bell. A good mate of mine just died about 3 weeks ago. He was in the paper, Tommy Guevara. He took me on my first flight on one of those. Because there's another funny story for you. Tom was a part Torres Strait Islander, very funny fellow, good soldier. But I got in this little helicopter. I had flown in one before, just the two of us, and we're going to go and look at this area I wanted to patrol, which is probably over about 5 miles of terrain, sort of thing. I want to go and have a look at it. So we're going along, and I said, we've got to go down lower. I can't see anything. So we go down lower, and we're howling, flying over the street, and I still can't see. I said, hey, you got to go slow. And old Tom turns to me, and he was a bit of a character. He said, make up your mind, mate. We can go low, and we go fast. Or we can go slow, and we go high. You make up your mind. And that's, when I think about it, it's pretty good sense. So, to be quite frank, it wasn't much use to me, because going slow, you're so high you couldn't see any damn thing anyway, And skimming over the top of the trees at 150k, you're not going to pick up much either, are you? But I could see his point, I suppose.
So what was the point of going up there then?
Well, I was supposed to do a reconnaissance, but he's basically saying, I'm not going to get you and me shot and the plane shot down just so you can go slow and see things carefully, and it's his plane.
So with a patrol then, was there a specific way that you would operate in that day, a day patrol?
Well, yeah, I would normally say there'd be 15 guys. We'd normally go out in single file, out through the wire. The wire had passed, that we knew where to go, sort of thing. And the ground wasn't cleared much up to about, I'll say 30 metres outside the wire. So there's a little tickly bit there, because that's probably where somebody was watching the camp. You could get a few shots at you. But once you get into scrub, well, you move in whatever formation the scrub demanded. If it's very heavy, you go single file, because that's all you can do. Very heavy scrub. Open scrub will go into arrowhead almost certainly, because that's more fightable. Like, for example, I think I told you that one first contact we had where we killed somebody. Well, we were in arrowhead when that contact happened, which was great. We'd just go boom, boom, we'd probably be out for lunch and stop somewhere and get find a clump of bamboo or something like that. It was pretty quiet, and get in there. We can put a few guys out to watch and have a meal. we didn't see much. We didn't often see things, but well, I suppose I had some contact on 10 or a dozen ones I went on. Varying degrees of success or failure, sort of thing.
What are the more memorable ones of those?
Well, the ones we had, obviously where we killed somebody, they're pretty easy to remember. I had one very bad situation in '67. By that stage I'd been transferred to B Company. We're doing a patrol. We're going and moving as a company through the Sandhill area, which is down away from Nuidat, and there was some movement reported on a knoll ahead of us, and the company commander said to me, take a section and have a look at that. So I went round behind it and come over from behind, and I was again just myself and the signaller in one section, and the two scouts in front of us. We're going through very, very heavy undergrowth, really on top of a sandhill, but really gnarled stuff. You almost had to crawl through it. It was really, really thick, and all of a sudden, bang, bang, and the two scouts are dead. Well, they're both wounded, bad enough that they were going to die, and couldn't see a thing. And the section one was down to my right, so I sang out. I was to say, "Can you see anything, Clem?" As soon as I opened up, I had a face full of sand from bullets that were landing just there. And there's a burst of fire down that way, and he gives a big scream. I said, my God, that time he's gone too. What had happened, actually, he'd been creased across the backside. A bullet had actually cut his pants and creased him right across the backside without even breaking the skin, but giving him a really bad burn and a hell of a fright, of course. So I said, well, we've got to get out of here because we can't go forward like this. They couldn't see where the guys were fighting at. So we just backed out very quickly, a couple of bursts of fire, and backed out quickly and went back to the company. Then came out, ran it from the other side. And our two guys are still there, of course. We drove a track up the sandhill to the top of it, but it was too dangerous because if they'd had a rocket launcher or something, as soon as it crests the top of the hill, they're going to hit it. So I grabbed another section from my platoon, another second section that hadn't done the thing, and we just went in and charged down the thing. A bit silly, I guess, but they'd gone anyway. And there was a bunker with an opening on the front side of it, sort of thing. And where my guys had been killed was just about that big. It was just a little slit, camouflaged, built in it, and we went and got the two guys. They're both still alive. One's still conscious, but they're in a bad way, and they both died the next day. That's probably the worst one I was in, the worst in single patrol.
How did you get them back in the end?
And we just carried them out by hand, and then got helicopters in to get them out. Just a bad luck one, A lot of guys in Vietnam, a lot of our guys were shot that way from bunkers and slits because it's just impossible to see them until you're from here to the chair away, and it's too late then.
From the very first contact that you had where you killed someone, how did you come to grips with the concept that this was serious and that, you could possibly be the next?
Yeah. I don't really think that I thought that. I do remember that the soldiers all wanted to see the poor guy, It's because some of the riflemen were down to the right, and they all saying, "Can we come and have a look?" And at least a couple of them come up and had a look and walked straight away and vomited, because he was pretty badly brassed up, this poor little bugger. But yeah, it was, I don't know, I suppose you're a little bit cold and callous. We just sort of rang up, I got on the radio and said we have had a contact and we killed one guy and got his weapon. What do you want to do with him? And they said, well, find a nice spot and bury him and bring his weapon back home. That's what we did.
Was there any kind of celebration that you'd made a hit?
Yeah, well...
Celebration might not be the right word.
No, celebration. When we went back, we had the guy's pack, of course, and his weapon. And I said I'd take it over to the intelligence section at the headquarters, and I saw the RSM, old George Chin, who was he was an old soldier, and he sort of said, "Well done, that's the stuff, Good. I was pretty chuffed, Of course, I think I told him, my boss just said, "Well, why didn't you get the other two?" But, oh yeah, it was, at that stage the whole battalion they had about 1 kill, I think. So we were pretty chuffed to get some success, sort of thing. And it's nice to get a bit of training without getting somebody shot,
How did you deal with the other guys around you when you did come across conflict? Did anyone overreact or react in? Way
yeah, I've had a few fellas do silly things because but nothing that's sort of desperate. I've had one guy accuse another guy of shooting his mate when it wasn't true. I've subsequently could find out that one of our guys did shoot one of our own fellas. I only found that out about a year ago. I didn't know. Everybody else in the company knew except me, apparently. But these things happen. It's pretty, in contact, as I say, as long as somebody's given orders and telling people what to do, and they know what they're being told, and it goes pretty well. We have got contact drills, they're called, and they're pretty well a contact drill for most situations, even if it's only, run forward and get a bit of cover and get on the ground. People will do the sensible thing, sort of thing, almost automatically, and they've certainly got plenty of practice of it in training.
What's an obstacle drill?
Obstacle drill is just, an obstacle is anything that might put you in danger because of what it is, like it's a road. Crossing a road is different to walking in the bush, you're easy to see. And so it's easy to set up a machine gun sort of 200 yards up a road, and if somebody crosses it, just fire at them, and you've got a very reasonable chance of hitting them. So you wanted to cross that, you want to be in a situation where you're able to immediately return fire or do what you want to do. So it could be anything. It could be a creek, it could be even a bad piece of scrub can really be an obstacle. If it's too bad that maybe guys have got to crawl through it or chop their way through it, we're probably going to put somebody down on the ground who can fire if they have to, if bad guys come along,
So on those day patrols, were you constantly doing those kind of keeping everyone in the right positions, or were there moments where you just were relaxed and just walking through?
Not too many moments when you're relaxed, because anywhere you are outside the wire, there can be enemy, and sometimes were. So no, you've got to be alert at all times. And if you stop for some reason, like to eat or something like that, or for a smoke, which we used to do, which is bad tactics you wouldn't do now, you have to make sure you put your fellas in all-round defence so that they're prepared to fight if somebody comes along. I did get a complaint once. I can't remember exactly when, but guys from the platoon came to me and said it's not fair because when we stopped for a smoke break, for a rest, and our field signal for a 5-minute stop was 5-minute smoke. These were the non-smokers. I said, we normally get put on picket because we're the non-smokers. And that's not fair. I didn't know what was happening. But that's a situation where, 95% of us were smokers. So I changed that. Luckily, the guys were sensible enough to come and tell me.
And when you say you'd signal the men to have a 5-minute smoke break, you didn't talk at all in the patrol?
Not much, very rarely. If you had to talk, you would try to get very close to the guy so you could talk very low, very softly, Yeah, and that's sort of a patrol and things you guys to do. There are field signals for anything you want to do pretty well.
Can you show me some of those? That's 5-minute smoko.
5-minute smoke.
What were some of the other normal daytime things?
Okay, stop's pretty easy. Gun.
I'm not saying that. Just come in a little bit further. That's all right. Just with the hands, Gun.
Gun group. Go that way, Or I'm trying to think what else we could do. We had things like a villa stop. That's a dwelling, a building of some sort. And what else? A long time since I was in infantry.
What if you're in a conflict situation? What were some of the signals that would become really important?
Well, exactly the same thing. Just gun group, a rifle group. Rifle group is just...
injured or hit or anything like that?
Not really, no. Immediate ambush, hand over the face. Immediate ambush on is hand over the face and point to where you want the guys to be. So that's usually, say, you're paralleling a track and you hear somebody coming the other way down the track. It didn't happen to me ever, sadly. It happened to one of the other platoon commanders once. You'd just say immediate ambush on that side, and the guys would go on that side facing the track and wait till they come along, because they may only have 2 or 3 minutes to get there. What else? My mind's gone blank. I can't think
No,
of
that's
it.
okay. What about the obstacle?
Obstacles across, yeah, like that, yeah. Good guys and bad guys. I can't remember.
No, that's
Really
great.
can't
Oh,
anymore.
no, it's really interesting to see it. Yeah. What about a night ambush? How are they different?
Well, night ambushes, sadly, were very badly organised. And they just weren't organised at all. I've even written papers on it since I've been in the army. Night ambushes in Vietnam. We had to do them. They were a good idea, but they were never properly thought out. Someone back in battalion headquarters, and probably it was the intelligence officer, I think, was given the job of deciding where we would put a night ambush, and he would take it off a map. Well, that's ridiculous, really. It might be a track junction or something. Okay. Well, I suppose you think, well, that's a likely place that you might see some people. But then you'd be given the location to put the ambush in, and you couldn't leave until dark. You were allowed an hour before dark to get into the area. But you can't go into the ambush really until after dark, or very latest when it's just still enough light to see. And it's got to be set up. Ideally you need to have strings, because the ambush is always in a linear fashion. And you need to have strings from the guys at the end, who are going to be the first likely guys to see anybody coming. If you've got things, we used to use some of the most, they're quite funny really when I think about them. Because most of the ambushes in the monsoon season are done pouring bloody rain and pitch black at night time. You're ambushing a track which is where that box is, and you can't see it,
A couple of metres away.
Okay, yeah. So we designed, old Jack Kirby, the CSM, designed a thing which was going to fix that. There's a thing called a trip flare, which is like a little box. And normally it has a wire attached. And you put that out somewhere, say out in your wire fence. So some guy's crawling through your wire fence, he trips that and it pops, a big light goes off. It's like a big pot of, almost like one of those Roman candles things. Big flame comes off. So he designed a thing where we rigged up a trip flare, but instead of using the normal detonation system, we used a detonator like you'd use to blow something up with some cord. We used radio batteries to provide the electricity, and we taped the detonator and the cord to the top of the trip flare. So the theory was that the platoon commander's got this bit of kit, you see, and he puts it out between him and where the ambush is. Oh, that's right, we had cut ration tins. Ration tins, 5-man ration tins are green on the outside and silver on the inside. So we cut the ration can like that, fanned it out like that, and put the trip flare in there so that it had a reflector, silver reflector, to throw the light that way and not that way. And we tried them in camp and they worked all right. But the way you triggered it, initially anyway, in the first couple of months we were there, you had 2 bare pieces of wire. You had a radio battery which got 2 holes in the top with the terminals, and you wait, and when you reckon it's time to go, you push the 2 wires into the battery, boom, off goes the trip flare. So if you're the patrol commander, you're sitting there all night, you can't hold your rifle because you've got these 2 bits of bloody wire. It's pouring rain. The terminals in the battery are almost certainly full of water. It's not going to bloody work if you do it anyway, probably. And you just lie there all night hoping nobody comes along. So they eventually got better. We then got Claymore mines, which work on the same principle. You have an electric wire, and they have a grip thing which sends a charge which blows it up. You can also change that and use it on the trip flare. And we had those, and they were much, much better deal because you felt confident that it would work. Luckily, probably or unluckily, maybe I got had a big win, but nobody ever came along in my ambushes. So I was quite delighted, mostly.
So you really just sat there all night with
Sat
them?
there all night, yeah. We used to have in one of the ration packs, the daily ration pack, I think, a tube of condensed milk, which you use for milking your coffee and tea. And sweet like condensed milk is, you know. And so you get your tube of condensed milk and you put just a hole in the top, because it's got like a toothpaste tube, you know, little tiny hole, and hold that between your teeth. And every hour you can have a suck. It's a good idea, because you can hold it in your teeth, keeps you awake. You're watching the time, it's a good way of staying awake. I found it was anyway.
So I didn't get that. You did put it in
It's like I had a toothpaste tube and I'm holding it in the front tooth. It's got a little hole in the top. And every hour or so I'd allow myself to have a suck of the condensed milk.
And for the rest of the hour, you'd just be holding it
Just
there?
be holding it there, yeah. That's good. It keeps you awake. Hold the thing in your teeth. Because it's amazing. You can be pouring rain and you're lying there absolutely soaked. It's just pouring down on you. Middle of the night, you still can go to sleep. It doesn't sound right, but you can if you're not careful. Yeah.
Did you get sick?
Physically ill? No, never, not really.
Really? And all
Don't
that
remember.
rain and heat?
Yeah, you'd think you'd get pneumonia or something, wouldn't you? But it's very, very warm. It's not really hot, not really cold in Vietnam. You're just wet, soaking wet sort of thing. Yeah, they weren't much fun, the all-night ambushes. Dry season one was better, because you could see more and it didn't rain and that sort of thing, you know.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the, if you don't mind, the lead up to Long Tan and what the planning stages were in the lead up to it?
Well,
Just just to clarify that a little bit more, you were saying earlier on in your first discussion of Long Tan that there was intelligence around, but it wasn't necessarily used very well.
yeah, well, there was intelligence. The intelligence mostly came from radio transmissions, enemy ones that were intercepted. You know, there was a signals unit there that did nothing else but try and listen to the enemy's radio. Everybody has them. And, you know, they'd say a little thing like a call sign which has been identified as the headquarters of 275 Regiment was heard broadcasting here. You know, they'd show you a spot on the map. It might be 20 mile away. And then moved here and then moved here, and they'd draw a little plan to sort of say where it was moving. But the trouble was we got those all the time. We're always getting reports. We often got reports of enemy in and around Long Tan, which wasn't very far away from us.
How far away would it have been?
Oh, if you can think to Bribey Island, you think what Bribey Island is, from here to the other side of the bridge. From the task
So
force.
can we
Three,
sort of
four-
guess
3
kilometres? 3 kilometres.
3
yeah.
kilometres.
From
Well,
Nui Dat
hang
to...
on. From Nui Dat to where the battle was, yeah. Well, our own mortars could fire in support of us, not in front of us, but in support of us at the flank and sides, and they've got a 3.5 kilometre range. So there you go, roughly that. Some would have been a bit more than 3.5 kilometres and some a bit less probably.
And what was the terrain from Nui Dat to Long Tan?
It's scrubby really, rather than jungly. Short, not very high trees. Usually fairly passable. You know, you can usually find a place certainly to travel single file, which is not the ideal, but you know you've got to do it sometimes. There's a creek, I guess you'd call it. I suppose it's probably on the map as a river, but it's only about maybe as wide as the length of this room, and at its widest, and fordable. You know, you might be up to your waist or up to your neck or something, but fordable. And but tends to run pretty strongly when the rain's falling down. You know, that's called the Sui de Bang or something was the name of it. That was about halfway up to the plantation. Where the guys had fired from was on the edge of the plantation, on the close edge. So that would have been.
Whoops.
We were right to go. Yeah.
Yes, we are. The river was halfway from...
Halfway from Nui Dat to the rubber plantation, roughly. A little bit of scrub on the other side of the river, and then the rubber plantation started. It's quite
So
a big.
Long Tan is the rubber plantation.
Long Tan is really the village of Long Tan, which is situated on the southern side of the plantation, but a village which was deserted and had been, the Vietnamese government had said nobody's allowed to live there. It's in a free fire area. But we had, as I say, we had been there many times before, been through and round it anyway. So we knew the area, sort of thing. And the plantation, it's a slight hill rising up to the centre and then tapering back down again. It's got a road, really a road you'd call it, runs through it north to south, which was probably used to take the rubber out in the old days. It wasn't being worked anymore. Trees they weren't big trees. They're half-grown rubber. Each tree's only about that much around, and they're laid out in rows. Some growth, that just hadn't been cleaned out because it hadn't been worked, but it's pretty good visibility in normal weather. You can see people a fair way away.
So what were people saying about the area directly before this happened?
Well, not much. We always had a bit of a thought about Longtown. We always thought that the guys the enemy were using it for something, maybe to contact the local villages or the local guys or something like that. But we'd never done any formal operation to clear it like we did with the other one, which is closer to the camp. And as I say, because we knew the area pretty well, and we'd all patrolled through it, all the platoon commanders had anyway, and seen nothing, we sort of just really didn't expect there'd be that many people there. Although there were apparently reports of them coming that we never got to hear.
You didn't hear from your intelligence?
Not for that operation. We were told that the largest enemy would be likely to be encountered would be platoon size, so that's 20 or 30 blokes. Part of one of the local VC battalion.
That's a huge discrepancy.
Well, yeah. As I say, you normally try to have a 3-to-1 advantage if you can. We were given away about 20-to-1 start. Wasn't not very smart. Although, we're 108 against 2,000. You could say in the simple figures, but they can never use the 2,000 guys at any one time against us. We're only that big on the ground. You can probably only attack us with a company at a time, which is roughly the same size people we are. And we did have artillery and they didn't, which is a big advantage, a huge advantage.
Why do you say that they could only attack with?
Well, see, when we formed our final position, when they had the big major attacks at us, we were only in an area which is probably it's not more than 100, 150 yards across.
There's just no room.
Yeah, there's just no room to get all the guys to attack us at once. They just can't do it. If they line up a company, and their company frontage is probably about the width we are, so they can keep coming that way, and that's not a bad tactic. That's what they call depth on a narrow front. It's probably a better tactic than coming at them from all sides. Just keep pushing at the one point. But yeah, there were 2,000 of their men available, but they couldn't use them because of the way things worked out. And also, if you think of the way the battle started, they're coming along. They're coming to get in as close as they can without getting discovered. This is my theory. So that they can attack the base camp, Nui that night. And from their tactics, the way their tactics work, what they do to attack the base camp is they will blow a hole in the wire using satchel charges on a narrow front somewhere. Now we don't know how much they knew about us. There was a pretty weak place where the engineers group joined up to the side of our battalion, somewhere there maybe. They blow a hole in the wire and kill the people immediately behind that hole. Then they pour in there and turn out like that. That's the way they used to attack American camps, very successfully. They're great users of things called satchel charges, which are literally just a bag with a bomb in it, and you just throw it into a tent or throw it into a pit or something like that, So they're coming along, but they're probably almost as far as they want to go. They're probably not going to come out of the rubber until night time. And all of a sudden, they've got this group of 6 that hit 11 at first, probably is a screen or a close defensive patrol or something. They just bumped smack in 11 platoon. They've hightailed it back for their own guys, and I lost one guy, I think. And 11 platoon has hightailed it after them and said to him, hello, we're being attacked by what's going on here. Let's stop and have a look and see what these crazy buggers are doing. Pretty well. Half an hour later, I come in from the left. They're being attacked again from the left. How many of these guys are there? See, we're pretty well spread out. So there, at that stage, he's trying to feel how many they're fighting. And they're sort of saying, we'll try and hold those fellas there, and we'll go around this side and see what we can see around there, you know. And that was the first part of the battle. They're trying to figure out how many of us they're fighting.
You would have been trying to figure out the same, wouldn't you?
Yeah, although we had a fair old idea there was plenty of them. You know, anywhere after the first 20 minutes of the battle, it was obvious they were everywhere. You know,
and after 11 first came into contact with them, what were you hearing?
Just enormous firing, you know. Certainly localised where they were. But also there were, you know, traces flying overhead, all sorts of things, a lot of ammunition. As soon as my initial contact when we fired was over, we came under very heavy fire. And, you know, they were using a lot of tracer, probably 1 in 10 was tracer from their machine guns. And so you can see how high the fire is, you can see where the bullets, and they're actually, you know, they're about that high off the ground at the sort of highest. And so, you know, it was just a bit hard to do much without getting shot.
So you just basically stayed down in that situation?
Well, when we moved, we just moved in a rush, and one group after the other sort of thing, you know. And even still, we're taking casualties. They were very good at that. They were very good at suppressing fire onto a group. And later on, when we were back as a company, there was a lull, and the lull, I'm pretty sure then, was when they were feeling around our edges and trying to say how many people it could possibly be, sort of thing, you know. And then they started up the old suppressive fire again, and it was great. You couldn't stand up or you were dead. You know, that was just about the truth, you know.
What about radio contact? What were you hearing from the other platoon?
Well, we heard from Sharpie all the way up until he was killed, and then we heard...
What were you hearing him say?
Oh, the things I remember was, you know, at one stage he said it was a section he was going to do a platoon attack, and I thought, oh, lucky bugger, you know. And the next thing he said, no, it's bigger than that. It's probably a platoon. I thought, lucky bugger me, I'm going to do it. And then it's too big for him, and they're attacking him, and I thought, hey, this is getting a bit different.
So initially you wished you'd been in his situation because it was...
Well, it was going to be a quick company attack. That's, you know, and I'm going to lead the assault platoon. That's what they pay me for, you know. Yeah, I was literally quite excited. I guess.
Yeah. And what...
And Dave Sabin, if you ask Dave, he'll say he's sitting in the background, he's saying, oh, I'm two lucky bastards up the front, you know. So we all sort of thinking basically the same thing, I guess. But yeah, it didn't take very long before we realised that we were the guys who were going to be doing the defending, and, you know.
What happens to you in that situation where, like, I know it's difficult to remember because I suppose everything's happening at once, but do you remember what you thought when you realised it had really escalated?
Yeah, well, yeah, I can't remember thoughts that I sort of dwelt on. You know, I had a lot of things to do, you know, and was concerned about doing them and make sure that they were done right.
So what did you do? What sort of did you go through?
Getting my wounded, finding out who was wounded, how badly they were wounded, whether we had to be carried, what we had to do with them. Admittedly, that really is the platoon sergeant's job, and he was doing it very well. I must say that he was doing that, but of course I'm supervising it, and then trying to get a message back to the company commander. At that stage, he thought he'd lost both his platoons. He's had one go forward, a massive firing, then doesn't hear much more from him. Well, no, he's still hearing from 11, but they were reporting they were taking heavy casualties, and they had heavy casualties. I went forward, heavy firing, my radio's gone. And 10 platoon might have been history as far as he knew. And so it's important to get back and tell him that we were still okay, we were still able to fight. But no radio is very bad, you know, our tactics are all designed around having a radio. So the radio was very welcome when it came.
Prior to that, prior to losing the radio, what was he saying to you?
Not much. He was talking mainly to Sharpie. He was the guy that was where it was all going on. I did ask to go forward to say I thought I could go forward on the left, and he said, yeah. He said, yes, go. Like that, that's all. I went back to talking to Sharpie. Because they were directing fire, calling in artillery and all that, and that takes a bit of doing.
Could you hear what he was saying to Sharpie?
Yeah.
What was he saying to him?
Not much, except taking his fire orders and telling him where to drop the artillery, that sort of thing, or just relaying that basically. And remember, Gordon hasn't got too much time to talk either, because he's fighting a battle at the same time he's trying to. That's what killed him. You know, he's running around trying to run the battle, which I guess he was paid to do.
Do you remember how the wounded were responding within your group?
Oh yeah, they're pretty good.
What were some of the heaviest wounds that you had that you were worried
Well, luckily there was nothing too bad. We had one I had a round hole through the top of the shoulder and down out the back.
The radio carrier?
Yeah.
Is that the radio?
Yeah. Johnny Cash had a wound in his leg, but I think it was flesh part of his calf actually. And somebody had already put a quick pack on it. The guy who was a scout from the left-hand section, Hornet, he had a graze on his neck, probably from some kind of shrapnel, I think, you know. Not too bad. That's about the first wounds we had in the first bit of action. And then we got two guys over in the right-hand section, both with leg wounds, leg or sort of hip wounds, but both still able to walk, you know, both flesh wounds. They weren't too bad. That was the first group I sent back. And then just told them to crawl out until they could get out of it and go straight backwards, and they'd find the company for sure.
Would you be yelling that stuff at them?
Yeah. Although when Cash came in, I had him very close to me. And I just said, crawl back out and go back to tell the boss the radio's gone. But we're still, you know, operative. And so he just Harry sent the radio forward. In fact, he says he can't even remember giving orders for the radio to go forward, but he must have done it because he was pretty busy too. And Cal, I recommend him for a decoration. He got a decoration, only a minor one, because I thought he was bloody magnificent. I wouldn't like to be running across there on my own.
So what did he do? He took the radio
from company, which was about 200 yards behind where we were, and came up on his own to bring it to me. I just come running through the rubber. I remember it was clear as a bell, saying, Mr. Kendall, where are you? Where are you? Over here. Yeah, he had a brush with the VC on the way, you know. And he's using a bloody old Owen gun, because the reserve road signallers and the stretcher bearers and that, the poor buggers only had Owen guns because they weren't expected to do much fighting.
So he shot out a couple of VC.
Killed two VC according to his citation. I didn't see it, but he told us he did. I believe him. Yeah.
So then you moved forward into a different position?
We moved forward towards 11 Platoon, yeah. Further forward on basically the same direction we had been going. So by that stage, already there were VC behind us. So,
how much further forward would you have moved at that point?
50 metres, tops. Two jumps of maybe 20 metres each.
And how many men were left with you then?
I think I'd sent 4, 5 back. So I had probably, can't remember exactly how many I had that day. 28 maybe. 28 left. Had nearly a full platoon with me, I think.
When something like that happens, where they take a whole lot of wounded out, how do you reform the men?
Well, it's very difficult if they had anything like 11 Platoon. I'd see John Robbins, who lives here on the island, he was running the left-hand section of 11 Platoon. He was only a Lance Corporal National Serviceman, so he was fairly inexperienced. And just about the whole section was killed, nearly the whole tenement. So you just don't do anything. You survive if you can, sort of thing. Well, I don't really know because I've never been in the situation.
But even then, but you had casualties.
Yeah, well, yeah,
taken.
I had 10 casualties out of 30,
Mm.
which is 3 killed and 7 wounded.
So that didn't really affect the group, the workings of the group?
Oh, well, yeah, later in the battle I had to move one corporal to another section because both the corporal and the 2IC were one was killed and one was wounded. Changes like that. But at that stage we were defending anyway, we weren't going anywhere, sort of thing. We were on the ground and defending. We didn't have anywhere to go.
When you're on the ground defending, is it just everybody in? And
Well, you're still probably basically in almost the same formation you were walking in. But in my case, in the defensive position, my left-hand section is here, and they're spread in a sort of loose semicircle. They join the right-hand section about 10 metres in front of me, around to there, and the reserve section fills in the back. So we cover maybe 50 metres on the ground, not even that probably, 40 metres on the ground, from front to back. So you can shout orders, although it's very, very difficult when the firing's really bad. It's very difficult for anybody to hear.
are they close enough for you to hear them shouting at each other?
The enemy?
Mm.
Yeah, to a certain extent. Certainly bugles. They've blown bugles all afternoon.
Was there a bugle signal that they had?
Well, they were. We didn't know them. They must have known them, but they're certainly blowing bugle signals. And they were running up there. Communication system was only by wire. So they had a team, which we saw during the battle, running wire from drums, going back to the phone to the guy at the back. And the guys running it were bowled over a couple of times, and they came back to do it again. And we captured the rubber the next day. We had still there, sort of the rubber reels, the wire reels.
So, Geoff, when you look back on that battle, what are the moments that you remember as being the most significant moments?
Well, certainly the part I told you about where the APCs arrived, that's pretty significant, because then you sort of go from thinking you're going to be dead to thinking you might be going to live. That was pretty significant, yes. That's the stage we realised where there were a lot more enemy than we had expected, and we were going to be doing the defending sort of thing. That was pretty significant. When I learnt that Gordon Sharp was killed, I was very upset.
When you say that at the moment that you realised there were a lot more enemy than you had originally thought, what went through your head when you realised that there were many more than you had expected?
Well, I thought that it was a different situation to what we were expecting. I don't think at that stage I thought it was a bad situation. I still thought, well, we're the good guys, we'll get out of this somehow or other. Somebody will come and help us, or we'll beat them on our own, or whatever, I didn't really think. Not towards the end, as I said, it was pretty obvious that if they got in amongst us, we'd be in trouble. But up till then, we were sort of just trying to stay alive, trying to get them not alive.
And the moment that you found out that Sharpie had been killed, what do you remember about that?
Oh, well, that's... I don't know, to that stage I wasn't aware, because that's just when the 1st 11 Platoon came back, really what a hiding they'd had, what a lot of casualties they'd had, a lot of guys killed. And the first thing that I learned that my mate had been killed, I thought, hell, this is not what I was expecting. I was a bit shocked, but sort of the bloke who told me so I just walked away shaking my head while I went go back to my platoon, sort of thing. But I was a bit upset.
At that moment that you had to, I think you spoke earlier that you said that you dropped down to your knees and you opened fire, and what could you see?
Well, I could see a line of enemies going in on 11 platoon, not of an assault force. What I almost certain was an assault wave.
How many of them would you say were there?
I reckon I could see about 30, but I reckon there was probably more. There were guys further away, their left-hand element, which I couldn't see. And when I opened fire, closest guy would have been where the fence is, I suppose.
How close would that be in metres?
15 minutes. Yeah, 15 minutes.
So you could see him clearly?
Oh, yeah. Clear enough to see that he was carrying an SKS, an enemy weapon sort of thing, and that he was wearing greens, which I should have realised meant something very serious, but didn't.
Why do you say that?
Well, the fact they were wearing greens meant they were regulars. They were in regular North Vietnamese army. We were expecting to be fighting Viet Cong. They normally should have been wearing black pyjamas. You know, there's no rules about it, but the fact that these guys were formed troops.
I'll just pause there for a minute. I think we might have to shut the window here. Okay. So you weren't expecting to see regular North Vietnamese army at all? No.
We knew there were North Vietnamese regiments in the province, but you know, the province is pretty big. No, we expected that if we saw anything, that would be D445, which is the local VC battalion. Not say the local VC battalion, the battalion from that part of the province, who we'd had brushes with before, not necessarily us, D Company, but Australians had brushes with them before.
So when you dropped to your knees to fire, they were firing at you at the time?
No, they weren't firing. In fact, they were advancing to attack 11 Platoon. And I doubt that many of them even knew we were there, because we were coming at an angle like that, and they were going away from us like that.
So they weren't really aware of you?
Doesn't sound fair, does it? It's very fair, believe me.
I wasn't questioning the fairness, believe me, not at all. But they weren't actually aware of your location then?
No, I don't think so, no. In fact, I'm certain they weren't.
So when you say you all dropped to your knees and fired, how many of you would have been firing weapons at them?
Well, I had two sections up, so there could have been as many as 20, but probably the guys on the far right-hand side of this section wouldn't have been able to see them, I don't think. I've sort of never really gone and asked every individual guy. I know that one of the guys on one of the right-hand sections remembers it very clearly and sort of described it. So at least he was in it. But the left-hand section would have all seen them, I would think. So 10 guys at least, maybe. Probably as many as 15 of us firing at them.
And what did you observe of the effects of your fire?
We knocked them all over. We did. Because it was quite a lot of fire, really. 15 guys firing is quite a large amount of rounds, and we certainly knocked over the whole right-hand element. And then, strangely, really, the left-hand elements didn't stop or didn't continue on, but just seemed to do a left turn and go away from us, which was pretty good stuff, really, when you think about it. They were, pretty well trained to react like that. You would think that maybe they would have turned and fired, but the sensible thing was for them to do what they actually did, because they went away, which then cleared ground that other people behind them could fire at us, and we started to take fire then, or when we got up to move on again, sort of thing.
Prior to Long Tan, you said that you had one major patrol where you had...
No, I had a couple.
Oh, you had a couple.
Mm.
Had you personally shot and killed any of the enemy?
The guy that ran across the thing, I fired, and Billy Roach, who was the section commander of the section in front of me, fired, and the guy fell down, and he had 2 rounds in him, both from Armalite's, one through his arm and one through his chest, so one of us killed him, but we didn't argue about who it was. In the other contact, I didn't fire my weapon at all. I was commanding the section, sort of thing, the patrol. I probably did shoot, or at least wounded one guy anyway. But see, that's because in an ambush situation, it is the commander on the ground always triggers the ambush. That's part of the rules. So the soldiers do know when to fire. They can see the guy they want to fire at. But, you know, in this case, they're running at us, and there's quite possibly two more guys 30, 40 yards behind him who are going to run at us too. So we wait till the last possible minute, is the idea in that situation. In a normal ambush, they're usually coming from your left to right. So you wait until you got as many into the ambush area before you trigger it. Well, that's the theory. I've never had to do it that way, but that's the way the theory works. So it's always got to be the commander who triggers the ambush. And everybody knows that. Don't fire until the boss does, because you might fire too soon, you might chase them away, you might do something wrong. So that's why I fight in that situation.
So in this situation in Longtown, suddenly you're faced with a lot more enemy than you had been faced with before, and shooting down many people at once. So, I mean, you said that there might have been 20 or 30 of them, perhaps?
Oh, 20 would be more likely, probably.
What sort of thing goes through your mind or body physically when you're involved in that sort of situation?
Oh, I don't sort of remember it as a, you know, any feeling of triumph or anything like that. You know, it's more, you know, it was pleasing that we did what we wanted to do, you know. And there wasn't any time to dwell on it. You know, we were straight up doing something else immediately after, because that wasn't obviously anything like the end of the show. You know, it's a bit different to if you'd been on a patrol and a bunch of 15 guys had walked into your ambush area and you'd shot them all. Then you might have time to think about it and send out scouts and do things like that. But that just wasn't the situation.
So how far into the battle was that moment?
Oh, I suppose from the first shot it might have been as long as half an hour. Yeah, maybe not quite that long. See, from the very first shots, yeah, it probably would have been half an hour, because there was probably 15 minutes before the real heavy, after they brunched the first guy, before the real heavy firing, that's all we knew, was when 11 Platoon got involved with a lot more people, and then probably another, 10 minutes while they called for artillery, and I'm trying to talk to Harry and trying to get a chance on the radio, and yeah, probably half an hour. And we walked forward for maybe 150 metres.
And at this time, was it pelting down with rain?
Yeah, started pelting. Probably it hadn't started raining when the first shot, when they bumped into the guys. But as soon as we moved off, as soon as we dropped the packs and moved off, it's just fell out of the sky.
So how hard was it to move in those conditions and to know what was happening and who was where? Not
difficult to move, really. It's a bit wet underground and underfoot, and you're getting wet, but visibility is restricted enormously. You know, visibility's gone down from maybe 150 metres to less than 50 metres, and probably even less than that. It's more of an annoyance, but not really many other problems. Visibility is a big one. Sound, well, you can certainly still hear all the firing. The rain wasn't that loud. Yeah.
You said that at one stage you thought that you received mortar fire, but you couldn't actually see it, or you could just hear it, or
we just see the rounds going off. Yeah.
So what was that like? Can you describe that for us?
Yeah, well, it was a bit frightening actually. You didn't hear him coming, which you probably would have if there hadn't been so much other fire. A round when it's coming in makes a screaming sort of sound, whether it's a bomb or a shell. Because often in camp, our own artillery would fire just outside the wire, if they'd seen lights or something like that. And in the front pitch, you'd hear the scream, and it sounded like it's coming on top of you. You know, I don't remember hearing the screams. That was probably because of the other noise. But really, just a big explosion in sort of one here and one there, one here and one, as I say, where I reckon my platoon sergeant was sitting. Yeah, probably. Well, it's hard to say, but I would have thought 10 or 12 rounds over an area of maybe 100 metres squared, something like that. But no damage, really. I don't think any damage at all, which is very, very lucky.
You mentioned also...
We were all on the ground, though, of course.
Sorry?
We were all lying down at that stage, you know, we were on the ground. Had we been standing up, almost certainly a lot more damage.
You mentioned that at some point you really started worrying about your ammunition running out. When was that?
Well, after the initial contact, at the stage we came back as a company, and I think Harry sent out an order, check ammunition, and it was low already. Most of the guys had fired a fair few rounds. So they're only carrying, the soldiers were only carrying 60 rounds, I think. And they might have fired 10 or a dozen in the first little brush we had. Some more when we were doing fire and movement. So they might have gone through two of the three mags, which is not good. So that was a worry, but then we did get an ammunition resupply, and I don't. Just trying to remember exactly how they got. I know they threw the machine gun ammunition in a belt, a big long, and so that was just sort of thrown to the gunners, and they grabbed it and hooked it up. But how we got the other stuff, I think it was still in packets. I'm just trying to remember. You just got to, you got a packet of. Well, at this stage I was using an SLR, which is a standard weapon. I was using Hornung's SLR, and the standard SLR bullets, And then after the second of the big assaults, towards the end of the battle, we just about out. I think I had 12 rounds left. And I say I wasn't doing much of the firing. I was nowhere near as much as the guys who were in the front rank. So twice really.
And at that point, when you really didn't have much ammunition left, what were you thinking?
Well, I was thinking that we were going to have to. I was thinking, I better think of some plan to tell these fellas to get up if they get in amongst us, Or maybe, I certainly was running things through my mind. I wasn't terribly sure what we were going to do if they got in amongst us, because what do you matter? I know a lot of the guys had machetes, and a lot of guys took their machetes out and laid them beside them. They were obviously going to use the machetes, but it was a pretty nervous period.
Did it cross your mind at that time that decision not to carry bayonets was a...
Not specifically at the time, certainly the next day and probably even that night, but not at the time. I didn't sort of think, it was a silly thing to do, but it did certainly occur to me later on, because it wasn't really until the first of the big assaults that we could identify the fact that, the enemy weapons all have bayonets fixed to them. They just fold them out, which is not a bad idea. We should maybe go for it. And you do think, if you've got to fight the guy, and you've got to stand up and fight him on foot, or if he's got a bayonet, he's a lot better off you if you haven't got one, I don't suppose I sort of consciously sat there and thought that, but it was going through the head anyway.
You'd done an enormous amount of training, and in fact all the soldiers, the way you've spoken, the Australian soldiers were pretty well trained to go to Vietnam. How well prepared do you think you and your soldiers were for that battle?
It would have been hard to prepare us anymore. I just don't see how you do it. You just got to live it. I had done defensive exercises, mostly they were dug in situations, so, we actually live in a hole in the ground sort of weapon pit. We had done those. We dug defensive positions every time we stopped in most of our exercises. Just trying to think, I don't recall sort of learning what to do when you attack by an awful lot of guys. No, specifically that anyway. Because that's a thing that's a bit hard to manufacture in training too, Usually, if you're trying to train a battalion which is 700 guys, and so you borrow somebody else's company of 100 guys to be the enemy, because that's all we can afford to use. So you rarely get situations where you'd see 700 guys all on their feet coming at you. There's just not enough Australians to go around. Not that we ever had 700 coming at us, but we certainly had a couple hundred. But so it's a bit hard to train for that sort of a thing, I think. So we were pretty well trained. The guys they knew what they had to do. They could all handle their weapons. They could fire as well as we could teach them to. So, can't do much better than that.
When you look back, are you surprised by, or were you, after the event, surprised at all by the way people were able to handle the situation?
Certainly I was very pleased. No, not really, I don't think so. Australian soldiers have the right attitude somehow, and it's hard to explain what it is. But they're all pretty good. And I was very proud of my guys. They were bloody magnificent, I thought. What can you say?
I mean, in a situation like that, it would be easy to understand how some people could falter. Did you see anyone in the situation express their fear, or?
Oh, people were frightened, yeah, but then, there was a fair bit of bad language floating around. But nothing that would worry me. I never ever seriously considered even saying anything to a soldier that he should have done better. No, not really. Guys got frightened. God, we all got frightened. But no, they were pretty good. Behaved very well.
What was the toughest moment of that battle?
For me personally, losing the radio. Yeah. That was, yep, I reckon that was the worst. I was pretty scared towards the end. I thought they were probably going to kill us. But losing the radio was the worst thing, yes. Because that, it's a sad thing that we have to depend on the radio, but there's so many things you can't do with it when you haven't got a radio. You can't call in artillery. And the only advantage we have over those guys, we had artillery and they didn't. That's what won the battle, really. So not being able to call for radio, for artillery support, a bad way to be, and not be able to be directed or give a report, makes it hard. So that was the worst part, and old Yank bringing the radio forward was the best part, probably. At least I felt I could fight my platoon again, sort of thing.
And afterwards, you described earlier that basically everyone was in a state of shock, really. So I guess at a certain moment you realised it was coming to an end. The Viet Cong actually withdrew.
Well, they got up and started to go away.
And at that moment, what did you think?
Well, I was very pleased. But I remember I looking at all the other guys, and we were trying to see who was upright and who wasn't. And we're all pretty much the same. We're all just stunned. They're all relieved, but nobody was sort of cheering or anything like that. And we're just sort of saying, "Shit, that's good." Just trying to think. There certainly wasn't. There wasn't any cheering or anything like that. And remember too, we had a lot of our guys were dead too. And we still. I'm only then finding out that 3 of my guys are dead. So it wasn't too much to cheer about.
How did you find the strength to cope with that as an officer in charge of these men?
That's what I was trained for. That's what they train us for. That's that's part of the deal. Writing letters to next of kin is probably the hardest thing you'll ever have to do. You try and make them nice, and you try and make them, sound like they're real, sound like you're not bullshitting, sort of thing. It's not very much fun. But there you go.
There've been a lot of things written and said about that battle. It's kind of, I guess you've heard a lot of stuff that you would probably disagree with.
Mm-hmm.
Are there things that have been said that you particularly find umbrage with?
Well, it was often said that D Company was ambushed, and that's just crazy talk. It really is. Anybody who knows anything about the enemy knows that they were very good at ambushes. If we'd been ambushed, there'd have been none of us alive. We wouldn't have gone home. They'd have wiped us out, I'm sure. If they'd had time to prepare what they were very good at doing, and they did it regularly to the Americans, a full-size regimental ambush, they'd have wiped 100 men out in half an hour probably. But because they were on the move, we were on the move, we were caught on the hop, took them a fair while to establish how big we were. We had a good artillery support. That's what bettered. We weren't ambushed. In fact, the first enemy we saw, as they say, walk straight into 11 platoons. They were on a Sunday stroll. You don't ambush people that way. And that's always been a bone of contention with any of us who were there, because it just didn't happen. There's a few little quibbles about some of the things that happen in the support, but I don't think it's a bit cheap to go on that sort of thing.
I have read that there were accusations about how some wounded Viet Cong were killed the next day after the battle. Were there any mercy killings?
Well, one guy's written a book where he said he did mercy killing. Certainly there were people who were shot. In every case that I saw, and there were a couple in my platoon, as we walked back into the rubber, and the soldiers were told before we went, so they were under orders. They were said, if anybody's in a fire position, you don't know if he's alive or dead, shoot him. And there were just literally dozens of people like that. There were dozens of people lying in positions where they could have been, hiding behind a tree ready to shoot you. And so people, just as soon as they saw them, they shot them. Almost invariably they were shooting dead people. But that happened, yes, it did happen. And I don't excuse it, and I would do it again. That's exactly what it was. I don't know about what Buick said, that's his business. I didn't see it, I wasn't there.
But in fact, what you were faced with was not knowing if these people were alive or dead.
And then the Viet Cong are notorious for, having live guys among the dead guys and shooting people. So said, if you're in any doubt, put a round at him and make sure. If he puts his hand up and he wants to give up, as the two guys who were alive did, good, we'll take him prisoner. If you can see he's alive and he's helpless, okay, fine, we'll help him. But, don't take any chances. If you think the guy could be alive, shoot him. And I would do it again tomorrow if I had to do it again, because that's just the way that it was. But some people can say they were walking through shooting wounded. Not true.
Is there anything about what you did or how the decisions that you made that you would have changed?
I don't think so. I can't sort of think of some I didn't like very much, and some of them were forced on me, but I didn't, On the other hand, I can't sort of claim that I did anything wonderful. I just did what was called for at the time by the circumstances. I'd like to say I was Napoleon, but I'm afraid no, I didn't have one of them square hats.
You were awarded and mentioned in dispatches for your role in that battle. What does that mean to you?
Well, when a commander, a platoon commander or company commander is awarded a decoration, it is awarded for the performance of his soldiers. And people got to understand that. You can't give everybody an award and say the guy in charge gets it. It's not a good system, but it's the only system that probably works. So I was awarded, as my citation says, I was awarded for commanding a platoon which performed magnificently under fire. And I'm proud to have, and I'm proud of them, and happy about it. And as I said, I'll tell them when I got it, I don't accept it because I wear the bloody thing. You guys earned it. Well, we all earned it. And that's the way it is. Decorations are such a funny thing. It's stupid, I got an MID. Gordon Sharp got dead and he got nothing, So what's the logic there? You can argue all day. Yeah.
How did that single event change your relationships within the platoon?
Oh, I don't think it changed them at all. You know, I'm proud to say my soldiers, I think, would follow me still, I'm sure.
I just wondered if in some ways it may have brought you closer together, actually.
I think so, yes. Yeah. You know, see, I was a regular soldier too, so I had many, many other platoons, you know. And sometimes I forget guys, I know their faces, forget their names, fellas who were with me at Long 10, that's disgraceful, but it just happens, you know. I know the guy, but I can't remember his name. You know, it happens, we haven't seen him for a long time. But I get on fine with all of them, no problems. And I think if they were in the army, they'd serve with me again.
You spoke earlier about how some of the people who were wounded that day and went home really suffered the most later because they weren't able to go out onto the battlefield and see what had happened. So what was that process for you, being able to go out and see the results and to get back into action, if you like, and why was that important?
Well, the one thing that we were really afraid of that night, waiting, you know, to go back in or do what we were going to do the next day, was that they'd get our guys, because we were still missing, I think, 13 guys still out there on the battlefield. Now 11 of them were dead, but 2 of them, we're still missing 13 guys, and we don't know if they're all dead or if they're near alive or what. We're terrified they're going to get captured or they're going to get mutilated or something like that, all the things, the silly things that you think of. We're also pretty worried that we're going to go in next morning and find it's all been swept clean, there's nothing there. And no matter what we say for the rest of our lives, nobody will ever believe us. I'll say, you know, well, they had a bit of a scrap, you know, and lost 18 guys and got, you know, went home with their tail between their legs. So that's why it was, you know, it just was a relief to think that we did do what we thought we'd done. And, you know, you can't believe what the battlefield was like. It's just, you don't believe it's possible, you sort of think, this couldn't have happened, you know. And then when we get to our guys, we find 2 guys still alive. That's tremendous. You can't believe how good that was. And the other little guys are all lying. All lying face down on their rifles. That's pretty good too. If you got to die, you got to die. At least they died like soldiers. Ooh, I've done that for a while.
We can stop if you would like for a while.
No, that's okay. Yeah. Hmm.
Would you like to have a break or?
Yeah, I might have a glass of water, I think.
Sure. Sorry, I know
okay,
it's hard
no,
to talk
okay.
about. It's how long afterwards would you say it was before you sort of felt like you came back to some sort of sense of normality?
No, not that long, I don't think, you know. The next week we had some good news the next week. So, you know, we're getting on with life. It goes on.
Can you tell us about the good news?
My first child was born, my daughter, my oldest daughter. And I got a telegram in the stylised fashion they used in those days, saying the baby was born, and I was able to send a stylised answer back. But I was still, she was nearly 10 months old before I saw her.
That must have been extremely hard to have partaken in a battle like that and to be still out in Vietnam and have your daughter born.
Yeah, it was a bit of the rest of the tour was a bit of an anticlimax, you know. It was just always sort of seemed to be a bit as though, maybe we should have gone home after the battle. Although it's silly to think of, we were all professional soldiers, or not all. I certainly was. But it was a bit of an anticlimax.
But what about the moment that you received that telegram? I mean, what was that like for
No,
you?
just marvellous. But very frustrating that you couldn't get on the phone and talk or something like that. Crazy. Nowadays, the soldiers ring up from Timor on their mobile phone. Yeah. It's still pretty primitive in those days.
So you and your platoon immediately went after Long Tan. You immediately went back on patrols, or
Yeah, we were. The timings I can't remember, but we were certainly on another operation within about 2 weeks.
and how did you feel on that next operation?
Oh, just trying to remember which one it was. It wasn't really a problem, I don't think. The guys were we all a bit toey about bugles. Once more before we left the country, we were on an operation where there was a bit of a brush with another company who were pretty close to us, and somebody reckoned they'd heard a bugle and said, "Holy shit, we don't like bugles. Bugles means the regular guys," and lots of them, but nothing came of it anyway. But I did another probably 7 or 8 major operations and 20 or 30 patrols and ambushes, at least.
But in those early weeks after Long Tan, were you sort of concerned that you were going to be faced with something similar again?
We certainly want to be faced with 275 again. I didn't, we're pretty happy about it. We've given them a bit of a blood nose. And I think, I do think that the enemy command said, listen, it's probably not worth the effort. Stay away from these guys, leave them alone, let them own their little province. And although there were some other big battles later on, but usually when the Australians got a bit aggressive was when they got into other big battles later down the piece. I think they said, look, it's not worth the worry. Let them go. Of course, the official reports didn't say that. You ever seen the official reports? They killed 400 of us, shot down 3 aeroplanes, and blew up 20 tanks, something like that. Some Viet Cong guy was awarded a huge medal because of the great victory they had. That's the way it goes. Propaganda. Even now, there's one of those things that either the Australian story or one of the other ones that was made about Long Tan, they talked to some of the Vietnamese guys who were in the battle. All pretty old now, actually, and they didn't really realise themselves that what their own casualties were. I think they kept it pretty quiet. One guy said, our orders were to hold them by the belt, to fight them that closely we could hold their belts. Descriptive, isn't it? Yeah. Still, like I said, if I'd have been Vietnamese, I'd have been on the other side anyway, probably. So, you can't despise them. They're bloody good soldiers, and they did their side of the business too.
You were, how old? 25?
Just
25 and in charge of all these men in this amazing situation.
Yeah, but hang on, Gordon and David were only 21. They were both national servicemen.
That story about the 2 guys who had been out there all night?
Yeah, well, Jimmy Richmond was one. He was shot in the chest and fell face downwards and sort of just lay there and was found that way the next morning. I mean, lying out in the one who didn't drown, really, because it rained all night. The other fellow was a guy called Mella Custard, was his nickname. Don't know what his first name was, Barry, I think. And he was shot through the cheek, not badly, and then a leg wound too, I think. And he sort of got lost, he was 11 platoon when 11 platoon moved back to us. And he stayed out overnight. And here's the famous story that the Viet Cong tried to take his boots off during the night. And he was said fuck off, you know. And let me tell you, that story was made up by a reporter from a bloody Australian paper. And was not true at all. It was just one of those. There were a bunch of reporters standing around and said that'd be a good story, and that so it wasn't true. But he was the guy we were walking back in the next morning, and he got himself against a tree and he's sort of waving his arm. And honestly, it was one of the best moments of the whole thing, to see that he was alive. And we had a guy called Ian Rencher, who was an Englishman. In fact, he went back to England, joined the English army and fought in the Falklands. But he was the company commander's orderly, which is like his sort of Batman and guard and all that. And he said, he's quite famous, he said, "G'day, Custard, how are you?" And Miller said, "G'day, you pommy bastard." And old Ian Rencher reckons that he knew he was Australian, that he'd been accepted.
And Jimmy, who'd been out all
Jimmy
night,
Richmond, yeah.
what happened to him later?
Oh, he was taken. He must have gone back too, because he weren't in the chest. He would have gone home, I think. Yeah, I'm sure he did. And so I didn't probably see him again until a reunion, maybe some 10 years later.
But he went back to Vietnam?
Went back to Vietnam a couple of years ago with an Australian group that were going, and offered us one guy. They would pay for him to go with them. And so we said, who wants to go? And Jimmy was one, so we thought he probably deserved it more than the rest of us. He certainly had an infinite feel for the Vietnam dirt.
But I mean, I think you didn't tell us on camera. He actually went back to serve in Vietnam
No,
after
no,
being
no,
with
no,
him?
no.
Oh, sorry,
He
I
went back only a
misunderstood.
couple of years ago, just for
Oh, okay.
as a tourist.
Oh, I misunderstood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
But
it
that
was-
must have been an extraordinary experience to find them alive and...
Oh, wonderful, yeah. As I say, you know, in his case, and he's still alive, you know, I mean, you would have think after surviving, after an experience like that, you'd have a fairly short life thereafter, but now Jim's going strong.
So how did you come to leave Vietnam?
How did I come to leave? My tour was up. I was one of the last of my battalion to go. In fact, Paul O'Sole and I were last. So we came home, actually first class on Pan Am, which was very nice. But sadly, we got our best set of greens, you know, one that had been ironed somewhere or other. And then we had to go to Saigon to catch the plane, and and the plane was late, and we were there overnight. So by the time we got in the plane, we were pretty groggy. But being officers, we were travelling first class. So we went to the first class entrance, and the little stewardess sort of looked and said, "Are you sure you're in the right entrance?" And we said, "Yeah, we are." They were very nice to us then, though. Yeah, we flew back through Manila. My wife was meeting every plane for about 2 weeks. She was back in Brisbane by that stage. And I had leave, you know, for quite a lot of leave.
What was it like to meet up with Bev again?
Oh, it was terrific. Very good.
The reunion at the airport, was it a teary reunion or?
Oh, not really teary. My daughter was pretty intrigued with me. She was about 10 months old, and she wasn't used to men that had little sharp things on their shoulders and bits and pieces and that. So she thought I was a bit interesting.
How did you adjust to this little person, you know, this little bundle of joy, and you'd been, you know, roughing it in the bush? Was it difficult to adjust to treating
Not
really with
no,
that?
She was pretty cute. Got a nice age too, just starting to walk and that, you know. It was pretty good. I didn't mind any of that. Yeah, I had leave, and then I was posted to Canungra as an instructor. Canungra at that stage had a wing.
Yeah, you were posted to Conungra.
Yeah, and they had a wing at Greenbank, just south of Brisbane here. There's an old army camp there. And so I went there first of all, and I was there for a couple of months, and I went down to Canungra. And I'd say that was probably the worst part of my military career. I spent about 18, 20 months there, I think. It was a terrible job, you know, it really was. It was very hard. We worked like drovers' dogs, and we got home, and all we did when we got home was sleep. We lived in a little married quarter at Bulimba, so I'd go away and I'd come back 3.5 weeks later. Or no, I wouldn't really. I came home every week because I had to come home to get fresh greens. Bev says all she did was iron greens. As an instructor, I had to be always spotless anytime I appeared. And the first typical day was the first thing we do was the obstacle course. So we'd go through all the obstacle course. And the last part of the obstacle course, the soldiers had to climb a tower and jump into the Canunga River. A big high tower, you know. And the officer in charge, as the last man jumped in, you stepped into the river to show that you could do it too. So you put those clothes on an hour and a half before, back to your room, new set of greens, train all day. Maybe in the afternoon we go to the rifle range. You'd be down on the ground showing a soldier to fire a rifle. Go back, new set of greens for night training. I think I owned 18 sets of greens, and 18 sets, something like that. I'd take them in 9s at a time, 9. And I have to go home and get some more. And she didn't have a washing machine. An old copper. Bad times. So you imagine I was pretty pleased to get the Chinese course. And
Did you talk to the guys much about what you'd been through in Vietnam?
No, not really. It's a bit of a funny situation down there. We weren't allowed to wear ribbons because the theory was that there were some instructors who had been to Vietnam and some who hadn't. And the soldiers would tend to listen more to the ones who had been to Vietnam. Don't know why they wouldn't. But anyway, we're all the same, and that's a bit of the army principle. So we weren't allowed to sort of tell worries or identify ourselves, which we wouldn't have told worries. We did, those of us who had been, try to teach them things what the facts were. And we got in trouble for it too. I told you the story about the bloody Holt who goes there. I just can't imagine anybody would be so stupid as to advance friend and be recognised. Yeah, bang. There are a few other things that were still silly. One thing I instituted there was just a simple thing where if anyone sang out take cover, if they heard a loud bang, they all had to get as quickly as they could onto the ground and into a fire position, no matter where they were. And that was just to give the guys an idea that, that no matter where you were in Vietnam, you could be in trouble. You could be, as I said, Vung Tau was soon to be out of bounds, so probably you're safe there. But anywhere else, the VC were very good in Saigon, and little girls did it. Have a little girl on the back of a motorcycle, they just sided behind and bang, blow the back of somebody's head out. That happened regularly, mostly to Americans. But so it was always a war zone no matter where you were, sort of thing. But I wasn't unhappy to leave Canunga at that time, no.
So how did you come to leave Canunga?
Well, I was told I'd been accepted for the Chinese course, and sort of talked my way out of going back to Vietnam with the general, who was the colonel, later general, who I saw later in my life when I was in intelligence. We had quite a good yarn. But I couldn't see much future, especially as a captain, because the captains don't do anything except, if he'd said you have the mortar platoon, I'd been tempted. But that's the only captain's job that's worth doing. And then even that, I wasn't that keen. I didn't want to do the Chinese, so when I went and did the Chinese, that took a year. Then they posted me to Hong Kong for another 18 months to do some more Chinese. And then they attached me to the British Army for another 18 months to speak Chinese. And one of the conditions of going to the British Army, being attached to the British Army, was that I had to be intelligent, so I transferred to intelligence school.
What sort of intelligence were you doing at that time?
How long ago was it? 30 years, yeah, I'd probably tell you. I was interviewing people from China who freedom swimmers to Hong Kong. They used to swim across to Hong Kong. And in summertime, there'd be sort of 300 or 400 might swim across every night. They'd catch them all and put them in police stations up in the New Territories, and there was a British Army sergeant would go through and sort of say, any of you people are Carter, which is Carter, you know what Carter is? It's a system the communists have of putting people in the villages who run the show really sort of like local politics. And it's normally given to somebody who'd been in the army. So some guy put his up and he said, oh, you're in the army? Yeah, okay, we want to talk to you before we let you go. And then they'd send them down to me and I'd talk to them. I used interpreters too. We had Chinese, Hong Kong Army, you might call them. They were part of the British Army. They were Chinese, Hong Kong Chinese staff sergeants who were all. We used them as interpreters. Even though I could speak, I spoke Mandarin,
Yeah, I was
the
going to say
national
is it
language.
Mandarin or Cantonese.
A lot of the people coming across were Cantonese speakers, Fukienese speakers, all sorts of things. You know, they can all understand Mandarin because that's the national language and that's what all the TV and the radios are in. But but I couldn't understand them. They talk totally gibberish dialect, so we had translators. And you know, you'd talk to guys, and those days we weren't friendly with China. They were a potential enemy. We just getting military intelligence about them. Some of it was very basic. One guy came in one day, had been a carter. I said, well, why were you a carter? He said, I was in the army. I said, well, what did you do in the army? Oh, he said, I was in artillery. I said, whereabouts you serve? He said, at Pawan in, Pawan? No. Anyway, in Mongolia. I said, what were you doing in Mongolia? Because he came from southern China. He said, oh, we were looking after the nuclear factory. I said, oh, were you? I think we're going to be very interested in you. And he actually got a name because he was, this is more than 30 years ago, so I can't tell you.
We're covered actually, so
yeah.
you can tell us. Yeah.
The Brits used to name their good sources after racehorses. And this guy was mine, so he was called Gunsind. Remember Gunsind, the famous Gundy Wendy Grey? That was this guy's code name, Gunsind. So I did that, and you know, it was a great job. I just loved going to work. I'd go to work every day. It was really interesting. A lot of it was pretty basic and boring, but it was a good job. The British Army was a lot of fun to be attached to. They a lot of good times with them.
Why did you like it so much?
Oh, it was just interesting, you know. And I was talking Chinese, and you know, Chinese was very good in those days. And you know, I liked the Brit system. They were great. We had a cocktail party once. I was based when I was learning the language at a place called Limewood. It's a fort on the end of Hong Kong Island. And they had a cocktail party every year and invited all the local dignitaries. And somebody suggested it would be a good idea to have it in the old fort, which was still there but deserted. And because it was basically the young fellas who were suggesting it, and the old fellas said, oh no, it's too much bloody trouble, you know. But there's more young fellas in the army than old fellas, and so we voted them out. And the man in charge of the mess was very upset about it because he was against it, but the colonel was on our side apparently. Anyway, he said, well, we'll all have to form teams and do things. I'd had a lot of electrical experience, you know, a bit in civilian life and a bit in the army too. I said, well, I can do maybe the electrics, if I can get hold of some generators and things. And this guy said, oh, so Geoffrey, good, you do electrics. Now you'll need some help. Is there a Gurkha engineer company in the New Territories? And somebody said, yes, sir. He said, oh good, attach him to the captain. I was a captain at the time. Attach him to Captain Kendall. So the next day, a young Gurkha officer arrives and salutes me and says, sir, what would you like? Wonderful. I love the way the Poms do things. We put generators in here and ladies' powder rooms there in gold gun shelters, and we had the most magnificent cocktail party. Ferried people up to the old fort on buses, on army buses. Drank cocktails and watched the planes landing underneath us. Marvellous.
So when did you come to leave the army then?
1988.
Why did you decide to...
Well, I didn't decide. I got to be too old. When you get to 47, you can't stay in the arms. You know, the fighting corps, which intelligence is still regarded as a fighting corps. So the only way to stay in was transfer, and I could have transferred and become a blanket counter or something like that, to one or the other, which didn't really interest me. You know, you got to make a break sometime. I could have stayed till 55, but it'd be even harder to get a job at 55 than 47. It's pretty hard when what can I do? I can shoot people and talk Chinese. I did work with Chinese for a while. I worked for a guy in the valley, a place called Chinese Trade Centre, but he was such a crook, he even frightened me. So as soon as I possibly could, I got out.
Was it hard to adjust to civilian life?
Not hard, terrible. Nearly 25 years in the army. I thought everybody outside was trying to cut your throat, you know. In the army they'll cut your throat, but they'll do it nicely, or they'll tell you about it first or something.
Sit down and have a discussion about it and then do it.
So I bought a hardware store. I bought a little hardware store at Toowong in Brisbane, and I had that for 11 years. Made a lot of money for about 6 years and starved for 5 years. Sold it and retired.
Did you miss the army?
Oh yeah, yeah. I still had a bit of contact. You know, I still see people, go to reunions and things, and I get invited to speak sometimes at things.
Do you remember the first reunion with the Vietnam guys?
My first one. I was fair way down the track, because I was posted to South Australia, and I was about the only long-term veteran in South Australia. Then to Canberra, where not much was done. There were very few people there. It wasn't really till I got back to Queensland in the army, which would have been late 70s, 79, something like that. So it was about then before I really went. Oh, no, in 1968 they gave us the Presidential Citation, you know, the unit award, and we all went to Townsville, to where the battalion was then, to have a big parade there to receive the award. So I saw them all then, yeah, or a lot of them anyway, because a lot of the national servicemen were out of the army, and some didn't come to that. Most of them did though. So it would have been about the first time I'd seen them.
And what was it like seeing those guys again?
Oh, it was quite good, you know, it was excellent in fact. Some were, there's still some regulars in the army. Buddy Lee, my Aboriginal corporal, was still serving on. I used to see him every couple of months or so. He was at Nogra. Spent a lot of time trying to get him promoted sergeant, never could. But he just couldn't pass the sergeant's exam. He was a good sergeant, and he's served 20 years.
Were there some people that looked like they hadn't recovered from their experience in Vietnam?
A few, yeah. One guy here on the island who's had a lot of psych problems, really bad ones, you know. But he was really badly wounded, and he was, you know, he had a bad deal. He was come home and was in hospital for a year before he sort of got back to civilian life, you know. He's had a few problems, but he's here on the island now and he's doing better. Yeah, John Robbins, the guy, he was wounded. He did very well in life. He worked for Elders before he joined the army. He went back to them and became almost their general manager or something. So he did pretty well. And he seems to be working through a lot of it now. Yeah, I know young Hornung died. I don't know how, he stayed in the army. He was a regular soldier. He stayed in the army. He was part Aboriginal. And he went back to Cherbourg. He left the army, went back to Cherbourg and just dropped dead in a football match. Had a heart attack in a football match. Maybe it was caused by the wound, who knows. No.
What did you think of the PTSD? When did you become aware of that?
Oh, I always had it a bit, you know. I'd go through bad patches of dreams. It was a bad thing. We're all, just about all of us, some bloody terrible drinkers. We drink like hell. And we're gamblers too, usually, because we all think we're probably living on borrowed time. Wasn't so bad in the army, you know, because the army had been my life for a long time. The last part of the army, you know, I had some good postings. I had the Debunking unit, which I loved. I had it for 3 years, which nobody had ever had it for before, and it was really good. And I had another last couple of jobs were in Victoria Barracks in Brisbane. One was an intelligence job, which was interesting. And the other one was I was the commander of all the people who ran Victoria Barracks. I ran all the cooks and the bottle washers and the guards. It was a good job. So I was pretty happy in the army, but then I got into business, and you know, I didn't believe you could be sick from stress. I never believed that in my life until I got my own business. I'm 3 weeks into my own business, and I'm hopping on one foot, and I've got a cold, and I'm sneezing, and terrible. But you know, it was interesting, and as I say, it was very successful for a while until hardware changed, and you know, we got Bunnings and all those big hardware houses and that sort of thing, and then the little ways blokes were really doomed. But you know, well, my lifestyle's okay because you know, we saved in the good years sort of thing. We did a bit with it anyway.
A few of the long-term survivors live in your immediate area.
Yeah, there are 8 of us on the island.
So do you catch up much then with those guys?
Yeah, well, Johnny Robbins and I are pretty pretty good mates. We go to a gym class together, which is run for Vietnam veterans. But there's one other guy that I knew before, and we played bowls together. John Hezel was here. He was in 11 Platoon. We play golf together and go fishing together sometimes. Neil Rankin's my platoon sergeant. He's here. We go out to dinner occasionally and socialise.
Do you talk much about that experience?
No, not much really. We might talk about people or funny things or something like that. Or, do you remember when that happened to so and so? But not much about the battle. We've all been through it. And we've all written things for books and stuff. So it's all pretty, pretty much old hat now, I guess.
Well, when you look back, what are you most proud of with your service in Vietnam?
Oh, I'm pretty happy about Longtown. I'm pretty proud of my platoon's effort. They were very good. I do believe that my platoon were primarily responsible for the company not being overrun towards the end, because we were taking the brunt of it. They were coming through us. So they made a major contribution, although both the other two platoons made major contributions too. I'm not trying to make it a competition, but I'm very proud of what my guys did. And the fact that, when you go right back to the start of it, the first thing we do that's really serious, we shake you up. I shake 2 sections up. We're going to assault forward and try and get to 11 Platoon. Not one guy says, "Oh no, we can't do that," or "Oh no." They don't even bat an eye. They just do what they're told. That, you're pretty proud of that. You can't help but be proud of that. So there.
What about the Vietnam War generally? How do you look back at that?
Oh, well, I'll get technical for you now. For years, I think the Chinese guy called Sun Tzu probably wrote wrote the Principles of War. The first principle of war accepted by the British and American system is the selection and maintenance of the aim. So the first thing you do is you select, why are we in this war? What are we trying to do? World War II, okay, we're trying to defeat Germany and Japan. So having done that, having said that's what we're trying to do, then you maintain the aim, and that means that you do everything possible to achieve that aim. You do drop nuclear bombs on Hiroshima, because that's to win. Maybe because of Hiroshima, I don't know, the Yanks have always had trouble grasping that. Select the aim first of all. What was the aim in Vietnam? To keep South Vietnamese independent. Half of South Vietnam weren't too sure they want to be independent. You've got to select a better aim. If you say, okay, South Vietnam is going to be independent, and that means that no Viet Cong or North Vietnamese troops will be allowed in the country, and we'll kill them all if they come. Okay, it's an aim. Let's drive them all back to Vietnam. If that then says we've got to beat North Vietnam to do it, let's say that. Otherwise, let's go home. If we don't know, we're not too sure what we're here for. And that's what the Yanks were doing in Vietnam. They're fighting wars and losing people without really being dead sure what they were fighting for, what exactly we were trying to do. Now, even when we were there, then they insisted, when as soon as we came out from under American control, they insisted we be given a province that we owned. That was our province. We'd call on the Americans for aircraft if we needed them, or big support if we needed it. But we said how the battle's done in there. And then our boss said, okay, no enemy moves in this province unless we let him. And that's what our aim was to try and do. And we pretty well achieved it. By the time we went home, Phuc Tuy was Quietsville. Nothing happened down there. The Yanks sadly didn't do the same thing. I don't see it. I think you could say that in the Gulf War and the bloody war that's just finished, same problem. They haven't really decided what they're trying to do. Why don't they just say, we're going to get rid of Saddam Hussein? That's what we're going there for. Whether he's got bad weapons or not, we don't like him, we're going to get rid of him. And if it involves invading Iraq, we're going to do it. Then at least we know what we're doing. It might sound brutal, but it's a fair bit of truth to it. And that's basically what happened in Vietnam. You know, there are an awful lot of people that I met in Vietnam who did not want to be communists. Didn't. We had a whole village north of us called Bin Ba. They're all Catholics. So, and in fact, one of our padres used to ride up there on a bicycle on his own to say mass. He's a brave guy. Died recently. Wouldn't be escorted. Wouldn't carry weapons. But the Viet Cong didn't shoot him, probably because they realised that would make worse PR for them than not shooting him, sort of thing, you know. But this whole village of maybe 2,000 people, all Catholics, all fought several times. The local village militia fought against the Viet Cong, fought to stop the Cong from taking over the village. So what do you reckon happened to them after 75? You know, and I'm sure there were thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of other people in Vietnam the same thing happened to. So it wasn't all black and white, you know.
Have you ever talked to your children about the war?
Often, yeah. Not much about Steve, of course, because he went to Duntroon, you know. I mean, and he was keen to read the books and he wanted to ask me what I thought about this and that. So I have talked more to him, told girls in general what happened, more about living in Vietnam as a soldier and what we did in Vietnam and that sort of thing, than the war-y sort of parts of it. But yeah, you know, if I can tell them something that I think that's useful to know, I would.
Have you enjoyed being a father?
Yes, very much. And a grandfather, probably even more.
More time.
Yeah, well, yeah, grandchildren can do
It's
it.
hard to have a family though with the military life, I imagine, because you're moving around.
It is, yeah. We had, this is the 23rd address we've had since we've been married.
Bev hung in, hey?
Oh yeah, she stuck with it, yeah. She's pretty good. We had some bad ones, we had some very good ones too. One of the addresses in Hong Kong was a 20-square apartment overlooking the harbour. You know, 5 bedrooms, the army paid for everything. Lovely. We came back from that to a hut, an army hut in Woodside in South Australia where the grass grew up through the floorboards. When you had people to dinner, you had to move all the furniture into one of the bedrooms so you could put a table in. It was so small. Steve was about 4, my son, when he came back. First day he wanted to go to the toilet. Door was closed. One of the girls in there. He said, "Well, where are all the other toilets?" Hong Kong we had about 5, and that's not counting the servants' quarters. So, you know, there's highs and there's lows.
Geoff, do you have a kind of final comment that you want to put on the record for future generations that would hear your interview about war or life in general?
Well, I think I'll stick with the army side of things.
Sure.
Basically what I said to you before, we don't have many soldiers. And so if you've got them, you've got to look after them. And, you know, I'm not saying mollycoddle them or I'm not saying keep them out of danger, but I've sat in a lecture where it was proposed that I, as a company commander, would put my first platoon across a minefield to clear it. And I don't agree with that. I would fight against that desperately. That's going back to World War One, and you know we've got to advance on that. And simply, we just can't afford to think that way. We've got to look after our people. We've got to use their skills now. I'm pleased to see we're doing it very much with the SAS. You know, those guys are very, very good, very highly trained soldiers. But boy, it costs a lot of money to train them, and you know we haven't got many of them. So you've got to be very careful what you do with them. You don't put them across minefields to clear the minefield. So that's my opinion. Yeah, pretty well I guess it goes on for the country. We're a little country. We've got to do what we can and look after the people who are doing it, sort of thing. You know, that's how I look at it. That's about it, I guess.
We have so enjoyed listening to you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It's very complimentary. Yeah. I waffle a bit, I know.
No, it really has been really interesting for both of us, so thank you.
What are you going to do with it?